Legislature.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Yes, we are watching the legislature today. Bit of a scramble to try and get back here. I'm still working, still doing my thing, but I wanted to get back here and
Honorable members,
listen and watch.
prayer.
If you haven't actually
Lord, the God of righteousness and truth, grant to our King, to his government, to members of the Legislative Assembly, and to all in positions of responsibility, the guidance of your Spirit. May they never lead the province wrongly through love of power, desire to please, or unworthy ideas, but laying aside all private interest and prejudice, keep in mind their responsibility to seek to improve the condition of all. Amen.
Amen.
Honorable members, it being the last sitting day of the week, we will now be led in the singing of God Save the King by the Honorable Minister of Environment and Protected Areas.
Well, this is new. I wonder if they're expecting a lot of people to be watching.
God save our gracious King, long live our noble King. God save the King, send him victorious, happy and glorious, long to reign over us. God save the King.
Please be seated.
Anyways, I'm going to try not to be talking over top of what's going on, but if you haven't watched these proceedings before, now would be a good time. You'll get an idea of what happens.
Introduction of visitors.
There you go. Introduction of visitors.
Introduction of
Well,
guests.
could be like 10 or 15 minutes.
Honorable
Taxpayer
members,
funding. Hello,
you'll be
everybody.
surprised
That's
to
what they're
know
going
I
to say.
have no
I'm going to let you guys watch
introductions
these, and then I'll jump back in, hopefully, when they start doing
Whoa.
oral question
I'm right
period
here.
and they get into
But the Honorable Member for
Bill
Sherwood
of
Park
Rights.
has a school group
So,
to introduce.
in the
Thank you,
meantime,
Mr. Speaker.
enjoy.
It's my honor to introduce to you and through you to all the members of the Assembly, students, chaperones, and staff of Lakeland School of Sherwood Park. Would you please stand and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly?
The Honorable Member for Chestmere Strathmore has a school group.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm excited to introduce an extraordinary group of parents and students from the Strathmore Homeschool Explorers, ranging kindergarten to grade 12. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Alberta Legislature. I hope you have an unforgettable experience and an incredible day ahead. Please all rise and receive the warm welcome of this House.
The Honorable Member for West Yellowhead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm honored to rise today and introduce to you and through you the group of grade 5-6 students from the Wildwood School in my constituency, who I actually share this region with the member of Flaxland and Parkland. He grew up there. I think his aunt actually works at the school, so he joined me for the photo today. I'd like to ask him to rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of the Assembly.
The Honorable Minister of Service Alberta and Red Tape Production.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure to rise and introduce to you and through you to all members of the Assembly, our friends, our partners, members of the Alberta Real Estate Association. I'd ask that you all rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of the Assembly.
The Honorable the Minister of Seniors, Community and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise and introduce you today to Morton Paulson, Senior Advisor at Osborne Intermanagement, and Terry Duncan, the Executive Director of Children Autism Services, two critical partners to the province when it comes to standing up for children with autism and their families. I'd ask that they rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of this Assembly.
The Honourable Member for Lac St. Anne, Parkland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm honored to rise today and introduce to you and through you an incredible teacher from Grand Yellowhead Public School Division. And I appreciate the member from West Yellowhead sharing this cherished group, Miss Lilsil Gunderson. She's going to be retiring. This is probably one of her last trips to the Ledge, but she's done so many great things out for that community. Please rise and receive the warm applause of the Assembly.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Decor.
It's an honor, Mr. Speaker, to rise and introduce you and through you to the members of the Assembly, Aliza Ozdemir. She works at Fort Edmonton Park and guides visitors to educate Canada's first Muslim mosque in the country, the Old Rashid Mosque. It's fascinating to talk about the stories that she introduces through the visitors about the community spirit of how the mosque was built. I ask her to rise and
The
receive.
honourable member for Livingston McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, I want to introduce to you a school group. They will be joining us at 2 p.m. right now. They're just finishing up their behind-the-scenes tour of the Legislative Assembly. They are a grade 11 and 12 class from Livingston McLeod who drove 6 hours to be here. So although they're not in here, I'm hoping that we may cheer loud enough that they can hear us out in the rotunda as they finish up their tour. Thank you.
Order. The honourable minister of Mental Health and Addiction.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to introduce through you and to you, or reintroduce a constituent of mine, Margaret Carroll, who's a board director with the Alberta Real Estate Association, a terrific community member, and someone that I care about deeply as a friend. Margaret, please rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly again.
The honourable member for Edmonton Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to rise today and introduce a constituent, Michael O'Neill, a teacher of 46 years. Ironically, it was just 5 years ago today that he was here to protest the movement of the teacher's pension into AIMCO. Turns out his fears were well placed. I'd like him to rise and ask for the traditional warm welcome of this.
The honourable member for Calgary East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad to rise today and introduce to you and through you two dedicated community ambassadors from the Latino diaspora. Estefania Pena, Eric are the leaders from the Mexican Society who support and empower the Hispanic community in Alberta. I would like to request them to rise and accept the traditional warm welcome of the House.
The honourable member for Grand Prairie.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to introduce
Yes,
to you and
this
through you
will
all
probably
members
go on
of the
for another
Legislative
5 or
Assembly,
10
my
minutes.
guests
I
from the
do
Hindu
want to
Temple
try
here in
and
Edmonton,
add
Terrell
the
Nixon and Rahul
agenda
Patel,
to the,
as well as Sean Gillis from
we
Grand
call it
Prairie Real Estate
stage,
Association, who is the chair.
screen.
So
So
please
something
rise and
drops
receive
off,
the
don't
warm
worry
welcome
about
of the
it.
Assembly.
I'm just going to try this here. I want to add this to the stage. Yeah, so in the meantime, I'm not sure if you can still hear what's going on. I can hear what's going on. But these are the what's happening in the agenda today. And here, of course, they were talking about Canada. They had a royal anthem on Thursday, oral question period, introduction of visitors, introduction of guests, yada, yada, yada. And then the orders of the day. That's the orders du jour is what you will hear Nathan Cooper say. And it's the part that I'm really interested in is this bottom part here, which is Bill 24, Alberta Bill of Rights. And so Mickey Amory, the Justice Minister, will be talking about that. Obviously, it looks like it's probably right at the maybe halfway through. So you might have to go through this for the next half hour or so. You can go make popcorn. I'm probably going to go make a sandwich. I've got 1,001 other things to do, but I'm going to keep this on. And yeah, so that's what we're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad to rise today and introduce to you and through you two inspirational women from the Latino community. Deborah Francesca and Catherine Caballero are the co-presidents of the University of Alberta Latin America Students Association, currently pursuing their undergraduate degrees in media studies and animal health, respectively. I ask them to please rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of this chamber.
Go ahead, Shannon.
Ministerial statements. Member statements.
The honourable member for Calgary Curry has a statement to make.
Today we remember Holodomor, a tragedy of unimaginable scale. From 1932 to 1933, 10 million Ukrainians perished in a famine not caused by nature, but by deliberate human actions. The systemic genocide of death by hunger, the English translation of Holodomor, was the result of brutal policies that stripped families of their grain, their livelihoods, and ultimately their lives. Entire villages were left to wither, their voices silenced, their stories nearly erased. The Holodomor was not just a famine, it was an attack on Ukrainian people and their culture. It was an attempt to break the resilience of a nation that refused to submit. Yet, even in the face of such suffering, Ukraine endured. The strength and determination of its people carried the memory of those lost through generations. As we stand here today, we honor the victims, the mothers, fathers, children, and elders whose lives were cruelly taken. We also pay tribute to the survivors who bore witness to this atrocity and carried their truth forward, often at great personal risk. Many fled to Alberta, settled in rural communities, and were crucial in shaping our agriculture, economy, and culture across this province. Today, as Ukraine once again fights for its sovereignty amidst brutal aggression, let their sacrifice remind us of the importance of vigilance against tyranny and
I want to
oppression.
ask, is there a
Let it
Latino Day
inspire
of some
us to
kind
defend
or a number
freedom,
of
human
Latino
rights, and the
visitors
dignity
today?
of all
No,
people.
but I did look it up.
May
It
we
is
never
National
forget
Red
Holodomor,
Red
and may
Mitten
we
Day
commit ourselves to a
on
world
behalf
where
of
such suffering is never
Canada
repeated.
Olympic Pride.
Thank you.
So, there you go. That.
The honourable member
David
from
just
Fort
asked,
Saskatchewan-Bakerville.
where can we get a
Mr.
draft of the
Speaker,
new Alberta
it is
Bill
with
of Rights?
deep
I'm not
reverence that
even
I
sure
rise
what
today to
presented
acknowledge
today.
Holodomor
So
Memorial
that's
Day,
why we're
a
listening.
solemn occasion
But
that
you
takes
can always
place on
go
the fourth
to
Saturday of November across Canada and much of the world. The word Holodomor comes from two Ukrainian words, holod for
I was
hunger,
hoping to be able to pop that
motov
up on
for
the screen,
slow,
but it's
painful death, which are two cruelties
stayfreeab.com.
millions of Ukrainians had forced
I'm
upon
gonna
them by
put
the
that in there
Soviet
right now.
government
My
in the
apologies.
1930s.
This is
In his
all
push to
live, and of
quell
course,
Ukrainian
we're doing
identity
whatever
and
we
forced
can.
industrialization on the Soviet Union, the dictator Joseph Stalin carried out a campaign of deliberate mass starvation unlike any other in history. By sealing the borders and
There you go.
sending
So if you
Soviet
go
troops to
there,
confiscate
it
food,
has the Black
millions
Cats
of people
version
living in the
of
breadbasket of
the
Europe were left unable
Bill
to
of
feed
Rights as
themselves.
presented to
We may never
government
know the true death toll that
initially,
was
I guess, back
accumulated
in
during
August,
those dark
September,
months between
and
1932 and
then
33. The sheer
after the
scale
vote
of
of the
genocide
UCP
and the
AGM,
Soviet regime's
the one that
repression
was
of
back.
information surrounding the famine
Sorry if
have
it
made it
feels like I'm talking
impossible
over them. I
to
can't
do anything
tell
but estimate
what
the
I'm
number
actually
in
hearing,
millions.
so
As a relative of Yvonne
that's
Pillico,
where you
one
can
of the
go
first
and at least get
Ukrainian
that. So I hope
settlers
that
to
helps.
Canada,
Stayfreeab.com.
the Parliamentary Secretary for Settlement Services and Ukrainian evacuees, also the MLA for Fort Saskatchewan-Vegreville, the constituency with the highest Ukrainian population in Alberta, I consider it a personal duty of mine to keep the memory of this unthinkable tragedy alive. Today we know that despite this act of monumental evil, Stalin failed and Ukrainians' identity was not extinguished. The Ukrainian people have persisted longer than the regime that sought to repress them. Today, Ukraine again faces a threat to its existence from a larger neighbor. Vladimir Putin, hoping to revive the Soviet Union or the Russian Empire, has violated Ukrainian sovereign borders and caused the death of millions of people. On this Holodomor Memorial Day, my thoughts aren't only with those who lost their lives in the famine decades ago, but with the brave men and women fighting for freedom, democracy, and their existence today. Slava Ukraini.
The honourable member for Edmonton South.
Mr. Speaker, Albertans rely on the CPP to make up their income in their retirement years so they can retire comfortably and with dignity. Albertans trust their CPP. It's been around since the 1960s and praised globally for stability, portability, security, and investment strategies. Albertans are telling us loud and clear that they do not want their CPP touched. They are scared the Premier will gamble away their retirement savings by playing political games, toying with an Alberta pension plan. This fear is becoming a reality by the
I could definitely talk
of AIMCO
at length
by
on this
the
topic.
UCP this week.
Maybe I will later.
AIMCO is the pension fund manager that manages $170 billion of Albertan assets and likely manager of the proposed APP. Under the UCP, AIMCO underperformed with losses up to $2.1 billion in 2020 alone. A political appointment will not solve this. The new chair of AIMCO, Stephen Harper, was a co-signer of the Firewall letter, which called on the Alberta government to set up its own pension program. And now he'll have the opportunity to decide who, what, where, and how the retirement funds of hundreds of thousands of Albertans will be invested. This Premier is building on the disastrous idea to create an APP. This sends a horrific message to Albertans who are fearful of no longer having a pension if the UCP government gambles their pensions in their pet project. On this side of the House, we'll always stand up to protect the pensions of Albertans from the games and schemes of this UCP government. Hands off our CPP.
You know, if the NDP came up with this idea, I think they would probably have had a different message.
The honourable member for Livingston McLeod.
The new NDP.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Alberta's government is committed to strengthening Alberta's primary healthcare system and delivering innovative solutions to ensure Albertans can access the healthcare they need when and where they need it most. As Parliamentary Secretary for Health Workforce Engagement, I've had the chance to meet with nurse practitioners across the province, and today I'm happy to share some of the updates on the success of Alberta's Nurse Practitioner Primary Care Program. Through this program, which was launched by our government in April, nurse practitioners are now practicing independently in communities across the province. This program is a game changer for our healthcare system. With 33 nurse practitioners already practicing in rural and remote areas like Coaldale, Concert, and Two Hills. This means now more than 30,000 Albertans have access to vital primary care. Mr. Speaker, since the program was announced, we have had a promising response with a total of 67 applications submitted, with 56 being approved already. And as more practitioners receive their approval, an additional 21,000 Albertans will benefit through this program. The program allows nurse practitioners to operate autonomously, offering comprehensive care, accepting walk-in appointments, and ensuring after-hours availability. These highly skilled professionals are providing a fundamental service to address gaps in care, particularly in rural and remote areas. This initiative highlights our government's commitment to modernizing primary care, ensuring it remains patient-focused and accessible to all Albertans. By fully utilizing the expertise of nurse practitioners, we're not only easing the burden on our healthcare system, but also delivering on our promise to improve access to timely and high-quality care. Mr. Speaker, this government is grateful to the dedication of our nurse practitioners who are playing a critical role in strengthening healthcare for Albertans. I am proud to say the Nurse Practitioner Primary Care Program is the right step to ensuring all Albertans can receive the care when and where they need it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Calgary Varsity has a statement to make.
Imagine what it feels like to know that your kidneys are failing and that your future is severe fatigue and spending 3 days a week tied to a dialysis machine. You won't be able to travel and you'll miss many family events. Dialysis keeps you alive, but it does not give you a life. Severe disability faces those with other organ failure. Now imagine there's a solution, organ transplant. But transplant may never be available to you. It takes an average of 7 to 10 years to receive a kidney from a deceased donor. Besides a limited number of donors, there is limited government support for the actions needed to improve your chances of getting a transplant. Even though early treatment saves lives, keeps people productive, and costs much, much less to the healthcare system. In Alberta, 483 organ transplants were performed in 2023. 84% were from deceased donors and 59% were kidneys. But by year end, there were still 455 people on the wait list. 81 more had been withdrawn from the list, usually because they were no longer medically appropriate, and 38 died waiting. We need to improve access to organ donation. This is a nonpartisan issue. For the well-being of those with failing organs and to reduce the future healthcare costs, we need to invest in organ donation programs, assure donor assessments are rapid, that more potential donors are assessed, and we need to increase public awareness, including the option of living kidney donation. One small step this government can take is to give Albertans the choice of opting on their tax form to receive information about organ donation.
The honourable member for Edmonton Castle Downs.
Mr. Speaker, as the Shadow Minister for Tourism and Sport, I have the luxury of witnessing amazing athletes from across our province compete. The Albertans here today who competed for Team Canada are among the best athletes in the world. 34 Albertans represented Canada at the 2024 Paris Olympics, the highest number of athletes from Alberta on Team Canada since 1988 Winter Olympics were held here in Calgary. Olympians and Paralympians demonstrate to the entire province the value of hard work, discipline, and teamwork. Their stories serve as an inspiration for young athletes across our province. Watching these talented athletes represent their communities inspires more young people to play and stay in sport. From small-town volunteer hockey coaches to sports medicine students, it takes a village to support athletes through each stage of their career. So many coaches, parents, and organizations across Alberta play a vital role at every stage of an athlete's journey, from development and education to competition to training and counseling and mental health support. High-performance success in Alberta, like that of our Olympians, depends on broad access and positive experiences in all phases of an athlete's journey in sport. The success of these athletes are a reminder to remain committed to the relentless pursuit of a safe, inclusive, and barrier-free sports system. The Alberta NDP are deeply committed to growing opportunities for all Albertans to play in sport in our province. As a shadow minister and a proud sports mom, I will work every day to help eliminate barriers and grow Albertans' access to sport. Thank you for making Alberta proud.
Honorable members, the time is now 1:50, and that makes it oral question period. And the leader of His Majesty's Loyal Opposition has question 1.
Mr. Speaker, the fiscal update says while the government is doing well with a big surplus, average Albertans are not. The update today says unemployment will rise to 7.4%. It says Albertans won't see more doctors or nurses hired to fix the healthcare crisis, and it has nothing to make life more affordable. The government today announced not a single new measure to make the average Albertan's cost of living better. When the government is saying the bottom line is fine, why is the Premier doing nothing to make life more affordable for Albertans?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted to rise and commend the Finance Minister for the prudent work that he's done in managing the budget. We knew at the beginning of the year that there was volatility in oil and gas prices, and we also know that in order to balance the budget, it has to average $74 on the year. I'd ask the official opposition leader to consult what WTI is right now to know why it is we've built in that measure of prudence, because we want to make sure that we run surpluses, which allow us to pay down debt, put money into savings, and then be able to deliver on one-time support for Albertans, which we've done in the past. We want to make sure that we run a balanced budget this year, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, we know WTI is $69 today, and the finance admitted that it will be tough to balance the books next year if oil drops below $70 a barrel, which it has, and it does. And so the resource roller coaster continues. But Albertans want stability from their government. They want a budget not built on oil price fluctuations, but on reliable, stable, prudent planning. The fiscal update also shows natural gas production down, along with weakness in agriculture, manufacturing, other sectors. Why is the Premier having such a hard time diversifying the economy?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I mean, the wealth creators are diversifying our economy in an amazing way. We've managed over the last 3 years to see over $700 million of venture capital come into our market. We have also seen nearly $3 billion announced in agri-food processing investment. We have the single largest investment with Dow Chemical, net zero petrochemical project, Air Products, which is a net zero hydrogen product. We've developed out our aerospace industry. We've had some of the largest film and television productions in the entire country take place in our province. We're doing an amazing job of diversifying the economy, Mr. Speaker.
The Leader of the Opposition.
What the government hasn't done and hasn't put in their fiscal update is exactly what could happen to Alberta's export markets if the new U.S. administration brings in big tariffs on our agricultural products. Today's update also shows employment growth is now the slowest that it's been since COVID, and unemployment will still stay high. Albertans are tired of high unemployment, highest inflation in the country, lowest minimum wage agenda that this Premier has apparently laid as her economic foundation. Why can't the Premier deliver a fiscal plan that assures Albertans of good paying jobs, high quality public services, and an affordable life for all?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, no one wanted to live here when they were running things for 4 years. People kept leaving. Their energy minister at the time said, go get a job in British Columbia if you can't find one here. That was their job creation plan. Mr. Speaker, in the last 3 years, we have had 450,000 people move to Alberta. We have been the leader in private sector job creation and growth. 100,000 new jobs created year over year. Our industry in the construction field is responding. We've seen year over year increases in home builds. We're heading in the right direction, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition for her second set of questions.
Albertans don't agree with the direction, Mr. Speaker, because with their $4 billion surplus, the Premier has decided to hand out to their insider friends, Alberta Energy Regulator, large bonuses and pay increases. Yesterday, they very quietly boosted the pay of directors and the chair. Albertans do not want AER brass to get rich. They want them to do their jobs and to ensure Alberta is developed responsibly. After her buddy David Yeager's $70,000 report that recommended giving more cash, she appointed him to the board. Why is she giving a Christmas bonus?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, if the members opposite consult the record, you'll see that this is actually an adjustment back to the levels that they were paying when they were in government. And they also should know that 100% of the cost of the Alberta Energy Regulator is paid for by the industry that is being regulated. There are no taxpayer dollars going in to support the AER. In fact, what we're doing is making sure that we're attracting the very best people to return the AER to, I think, its former glory of being the very best regulator of oil and gas. And I think we're going to have some good people as a result.
The Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Better pay should equal better performance, and that's not what Albertans are getting. What they get is an AER board chair filing an expense on July 30th that is mind-blowing. $1,637 dinner, $1,637 dinner, 109 hours if that was minimum wage, Mr. Speaker. Will the Premier tell Albertans who attended this $1,600 dinner? Why is she giving AER board members double their pay at a cost of tens of thousands of dollars more a year? And why does she think that the board chair deserves a Christmas bonus raise to $174,000 a year?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, let's remember the AER is a quasi-judicial board that has independence. It has an independent board with an independent director, and they make independent decisions funded independently by industry. If there are issues, it will be dealt with on an internal basis. I don't want the members opposite to give taxpayers the impression that these costs are being funded out of taxpayer dollars. They are not. These are 100% industry levies, and they are going to operate in a way that makes sure that they can do the work that they do of delivering the best oversight on our oil and gas industry.
Leader of the Opposition.
Newsflash, there are issues. The AER board chair also expensed a $1,000 dinner on March 20th at none other than the Calgary Petroleum Club. The AER picked up grilled squid, 10-ounce ribeye and sirloins, filet mignon, caper butter salmons, roast duck, wild boar bolognese, lots of chocolate cake, and apple arugula salads on the side. Does the Premier agree with the expense policies of the AER and these kinds of incredibly fancy and expensive dinners? And if not, why is she giving the AER chair and board a big Christmas bonus?
The Order. The Honourable the Premier has the call.
Mr. Speaker, no doubt the members opposite could go and discuss with the industry that is paying the levies to see if they have issues with the head of the AER going to meet them at the Petroleum Club. That seems like the kind of thing that you would expect that a member of the Alberta Energy Regulator would do. As I said once again, Mr. Speaker, you cannot have the same policies for an independent organization that is industry funded versus the very strict rules that we have for public agencies that are government funded and taxpayer funded, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Whitemud has a question today.
Mr. Speaker, Albertans pay more for car insurance than anywhere else in Canada by a lot. The Premier promised to fix Alberta's auto insurance system. But in a stunningly tone-deaf move, her fix is that Albertans will actually pay more for car insurance, a lot more, 7.5% more next year and 7.5% more the year after. Adding insult to literal injury, the Premier has removed the ability for Albertans to access full compensation for their injuries. How can the Premier think Albertans should actually pay more for car insurance than they already are? How can she be so out of touch with everyday Albertans?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think everyday Albertans or the opposition, I don't think anybody that's thinking about this can believe that we can change the system without actually changing the system. The system is broken. That is very clear. The rates that are being charged do not cover the actual costs of the system. We have things like profit provisions at the rate board. We're able to watch the profit of insurance companies. Currently, there's one profitable insurance company left in Alberta. 2 have already left, likely more will. We're going to have short-term reform moving towards longer-term reform. I'll tell you more today.
Member for Edmonton Whitemud.
What Albertans can't believe is that this government is making them pay more when they're already struggling through an affordability crisis. Raising the highest insurance rates in the country by 15% over 2 years to maybe reduce them a little bit in the 3rd year means that at the end of all this, Albertans will still be paying the highest car insurance in the country. That's the math. The UCP scrapped the NDP's insurance caps, forcing Albertans to endure massive premium hikes year after year on top of soaring costs for groceries, housing, and utilities. Bringing in the only private no-fault industry in the country, well, that's a recipe for a UCP disaster. Whose interest is the government serving this time? Because it's not Albertans.
Yes.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
It is absolutely Albertans and only Albertans. They have been entirely front of mind for us as we've gone through this endeavor. Nobody is going to be untouched through this process. That's what large change involves. So we've done consultation with the medical community, the brokerages, the insurance companies, the legal community, and Albertans at large through a large survey, and that's front of mind for us. I can't wait to do the announcement this afternoon where people will see the changes that are going to come short-term and long. I can assure you that insurance companies will not be made whole through this process.
The Honourable Member.
It's hard to believe that the Minister of Finance can't wait to tell Albertans that they're going to be paying more for car insurance. A woman on ACE shared with me that she's living on $1,800 a month, spends $1,200 on rent, leaving just $600 for groceries, utilities, and everything else. Now the UCP is telling her that she'll have to pay another $450 for the next 2 years for car insurance, with more increases to come. Not to mention, of course, that the UCP is quietly giving themselves permission to de-index her ACE. It feels like the cost of living crisis is a joke to the UCP. Decreasing benefits and increasing costs are the actions of a government that is not listening to Albertans. Will the minister just admit that they are not even pretending to try anymore?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we could have kept plodding along, attempting to tweak at the edges a system that was broken. That's not what we're going to do. We can't do that for Albertans. We have the 2nd highest auto insurance rates in the country, behind only Ontario, and that's artificial because of the caps that are in place. So we have to make a choice right now to find a way to take material costs out of the system so that we can get to savings in 2027. If we don't do that, we will either have to raise the caps completely, build a public insurer, and then fill it full of money like BC had to.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Rutherford has a question.
Mr. Speaker, as a newborn, I was apprehended from my 17-year-old mother who fought to get me back out of the system. I adopted my oldest daughter when she aged out of care at 18. She's now 33 years old. We are both thriving because we have family who love us. The child advocate told us that 47 children will never have a chance to have a loved family because they have died. These are not numbers or a trend. They are our loved ones who we mourn. Will the minister acknowledge that the government has systemically and is systemically failing our children and our families?
The Honourable Minister of Children and Social Services.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. And again, just to the member's question, my heart goes out to any of the families that are affected by the loss of one of their children. Mr. Speaker, as Minister of Children and Family Services over the last 14 months, we've been working very hard with First Nations leaders and communities to look for ways to increase those cultural connections and those family connections, Mr. Speaker, because we realize that those one-on-one relationships that can come about from a loving kinship care provider or from a parent are important. They lead to the lifelong ambitions for children. Mr. Speaker, we're doing our best to help support these children in care.
Honourable Member for Edmonton Rutherford.
Mr. Speaker, Katie loved visiting with her family. She was learning the alphabet when she died at 23 months old from fentanyl and methamphetamine toxicity poisoning. Her mother has been charged with her passing. Gage was sweet, smart, gentle, curious toddler who loved to laugh and play, but at 18 months died from blunt force trauma. These parents have been criminally charged, and their deaths we will all mourn with the loss of these beautiful children, and now their parents are gone. Will the minister tell us how he will invest in supporting parents with at-risk families to prevent these kinds of tragedies from ever happening again?
The Honourable the Minister of Child and Family Services.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we're working very hard with First Nations communities throughout the entire province to ensure that Indigenous children receive the benefits from cultural and family connections. Mr. Speaker, providing those culturally appropriate prevention and early intervention services through our family resource networks, they help families stay together, Mr. Speaker. We know that these are having a positive impact on children throughout the province. We're recruiting and training kinship care providers and staff and ensuring that contracted child intervention services are culturally responsive to support our Indigenous youth.
The Honourable Member.
Mr. Speaker, anyone who reads the Advocate's heartbreaking report will see that the system needs to change. The government reduced the eligibility of financial supports from children aged 24 to 26, removing 2 years of support. We support the Advocate. The minister instead accused us of wanting to keep these children in bondage. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we are trying to keep these children alive.
Yes.
Will the minister commit to accepting the Advocate's recommendations?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we work with the OCYA and looking forward to implementing the recommendations. Since 2013, CFS has implemented 105 of the 111 recommendations that have come before our ministry. Mr. Speaker, we know that these are making a positive difference for the lives of so many children. I just want to correct the record as well, Mr. Speaker. There are soft supports that remain in place for children aging out of care after the age of 22. We have some supports, Mr. Speaker, that actually go to the age of 31, Mr. Speaker. So we're going to continue to have those conversations, look at investing into children at an earlier age to ensure that they're more resilient and able to help cope as they progress into adulthood.
The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park.
AIMCO's staff gathered for a meeting 2 weeks back. Things turned joyless quickly, and not because of AIMCO's financial returns, but because the Minister of Finance showed up, fired the CEO and other executives. Then the minister joined the other 170 remaining AIMCO staff and told them he had taken over the Crown Corporation and put himself in charge of it all. To the minister, what message did he intend to share with the staff of AIMCO with his radical new type of governance?
The Honourable the Minister of Finance, the President of Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know if the member was watching the news, but I'm no longer on the board of AIMCO. That came out yesterday. I'm proud to welcome our 22nd Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, as the new board chair. I would just say this, I take no comfort ever in dismissing people, but you should do it face to face if you can. And I felt it warranted to notify the staff that was there that was going to be, they were appreciated. It was going to be a reset of a mandate, and that, we need to continue being professional and working in the best interest of all Albertans.
The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park.
Given that pension plans are set up to deliver on a promise of a reliable income for workers when they retire, given that workers fund their own pensions along with their employers, so these are their assets and not the government's, and given that taxpayers are not on the hook to fund workers' pensions, and the government does not backstop pension plans, does the minister know funds managed by AIMCO are not government money to be controlled?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I certainly do know that, and I can assure you that the incoming board chair does as well. AIMCO is there to invest on their behalf after they heed their guidance about the type of risk rating they want to take, what they think they need to invest in to keep their pension funds fully funded. So they're there to invest on their behalf and offer the products they need to meet the goals that they have. That's the relationship, and that's what will continue.
Member Sherwood Park.
Given that Stephen Harper has been advocating since he signed the firewall letter in 2001 to have Alberta withdraw from the Canada Pension Plan, given that Harper approached this government months ago about taking over as chair of AIMCO, given that you are messing around with people's retirement savings plans and ultimately their opportunity to retire, will the minister explain to Albertans why he put a politician in charge of the retirement savings? Albertans have told you before and will tell you again Hands off our CPP.
The Honourable the Minister of Finance.
They're so choreographed today, Mr. Speaker. It's cute. But no, I would say that it's well known that Prime Minister Harper was one of the authors of the firewall letter, but I'd let everyone in the House know that he did a couple things after 2004 too, like lead a G7 country through the Great Recession in better shape than anyone else. I certainly wouldn't want to besmirch anyone's reputation in this House, and certainly not his, Mr. Speaker. I think he's a great Albertan and a proud Canadian. I think we're lucky to have him. He has a stellar international reputation, and people want to work with him.
The order, the Honourable Member for Grand Prairie has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank the Honourable Minister of Finance for providing the second quarter update today that prioritizes fiscal responsibility while caring for the needs of our province. Over the past 3 years, Mr. Speaker, we have welcomed more than 450,000 people who have embraced the hardworking, can-do attitude, the entrepreneurial spirit, and community-minded values that define Alberta. Could the Minister of Finance explain to the House how we are using our budget to address the growing needs of Alberta's families and our surging population?
The Honourable the Minister of Finance, the President of Treasury Board.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the question. What we did announce this morning was our Q2 update, so where we sit in the first half of the year. Happy to report that our fiscal position has improved to show a $4.6 billion surplus because of a strong economy, improved sensitivities around natural resources. As far as what we've spent it on so far this year, largely health, social services, and education to deal with the population surge, and also a large chunk of the contingency on dealing with disasters and wildfire, including Jasper.
The Honourable Member for Grand Prairie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the very positive revenue growth reflected in today's Q2 update and the expected surplus, and further given that our united Conservative government is carefully managing Alberta's finances to ensure supports for Albertans that are available now and in the future, Mr. Speaker, can the Minister of Finance outline how the government plans to prioritize these funds, pay down Alberta's debt, and also strengthen the Heritage Fund for future generations?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Well, the fiscal rules that we've implemented are so important for Alberta. And I know the members opposite mentioned the roller coaster ride of oil. The fiscal framework is our best tool to manage with volatile revenues. So it's so important to deal when you are in a good year and you are in a surplus position that you use it wisely. Pay down debt, invest in the Heritage Fund or one-time expenses that won't drive the operating line. Happy to say the book value of the Heritage Fund is now at $24.3 billion, up from 24.3, up from 23.4 in the first quarter.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for the reply. And now, given that it's clear that Alberta's strong fiscal position is the result of our united Conservative government's planning and fiscal framework, and further given that he mentioned the government is facing immense pressure on our programs because of population growth, can the same minister tell the House what this means for Budget 2025 and what the government is doing to prepare for the extra costs and burden that this will place on our revenue?
The Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to the member. We've allocated more than $1 billion currently to address health, education, and seniors and community and social services. We are monitoring the forecast of oil closely. I know there's a lot of geopolitical uncertainty right now, so we're monitoring those things, but also monitoring our spending pressures. 4.4% population growth. It's something that it's hard to get in front of. You're always going to be chasing it somewhat, Mr. Speaker, but we'll continue to do that and meet the needs of Albertans.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Foothills.
This government continues to ignore the need for schools in Calgary Foothills. The government did announce the School Accelerator program to build 90 schools in the next 3 years. While the minister stated that school announcements were no longer tied to the budget, no schools were named in the announcement. Minister, there are 4 schools in the Simons Valley in the CBE capital plan. Why haven't we heard one of those schools being built for the families in Calgary Foothills?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, very proud of the fact that our government has implemented an aggressive new school building program that will see almost 100 new schools built in our communities of greatest need. At the same time, we'll also be modernizing over 20 schools in other communities to make sure that Albertans have the schools that they need. As it relates to specific projects and specific priorities, we will be announcing the first tranche of 30 new schools in the coming months, and we will have more details to share with Albertans about which schools will be built and exactly where.
Member for Calgary Foothills.
That the minister has stated rapidly growing communities will be prioritized for the School Accelerator program. Given that the suburban neighborhoods of Calgary and Edmonton are the fastest growing communities in Alberta, and given that these public school boards have detailed capital plans for schools to be built on designated serviced lands, will the minister today announce the public schools that they will build in Calgary Foothills?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, no. We take a diligent approach to evaluating all of the school projects. Maybe the opposition would just stand up in the Assembly and announce projects without due consideration and evaluation. But that's not how we do things. Mr. Speaker, we take the requests from all of our school divisions across the province. We evaluate them. We looked at considerations such as safety. We look at considerations such as utilization and need. We score, we evaluate all of those, and then we make a final decision. When we're there and when we made that final decision, I'll be happy to let the member.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Foothills.
Yeah, we will build public schools for all the children in Alberta.
Yeah.
Given that this summer, while the Alberta NDP was engaging with families in Calgary Foothills, we collected over 1,300 signatures of people demanding a local school. And Minister, you'll see me table the petition today. Given that every day parents are expressing their frustration with the government ignoring their needs and the needs of their children. Given that Calgary Foothills continues to grow by adding hundreds of residents every month, will the minister announce his intention to build the Sage Hill Kincora Middle School in Calgary Foothills?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me update the member. I think I've done it before, but happy to do it again. You know, the way it works is our school divisions evaluate the priorities and needs that they know that their community and their division needs. They submit those needs to us. We evaluate and score them and then determine which projects are able to proceed. The project that the member is referring to is quite far down the way on the priority list for the Calgary Board of Education. They have other projects that are of higher priority. I know the member is talking to his constituents and collecting signatures, but we will take the guidance and advice from the Calgary Board of Education as to which schools are the highest priority.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Highlands Norwood.
4 people have been found dead in Edmonton bus shelters over the past 2 weeks. These are people they loved and were loved. They mattered. Unhoused Albertans are dying at unprecedented rates. Frostbite amputations have spiked, and it's winter out there. Shelters in Edmonton last night were at 98% capacity, 94% for the rest of Alberta. The UCP's approach isn't working, yet the minister keeps doubling down, saying he's confident. Well, I'm confident that we'll have more preventable deaths on our streets unless the UCP acts. How is any of this acceptable? What is your plan?
The Honourable Minister of Community and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Any death is unfortunate, Mr. Speaker. We actually don't know the circumstance of those individuals' deaths. We'll let the Chief Medical Examiner do their job, and once we know the results of those deaths, we will take action if there has some sort of issue associated with the government. Mr. Speaker, we are confident in our plan. We are confident in our partners. This government has invested more money than any government in history, including the NDP, to be able to keep care of the homeless in our largest cities across this province, Mr. Speaker. We continue to exercise our plan, which is to get people to both housing and emergency shelter to keep them safe. And yet again, Mr. Speaker, I will stress the NDP's plan is to keep them outside. That's not going to happen.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Highlands Norwood.
Minister, these are real people. People like my constituent Robert, who's been staying at a shelter for 5 months. And like so many living in the shelter system, he suffers physical and mental health issues due to childhood trauma. While in the shelter, Robert's been assaulted many times. He's had everything stolen, including his medications, CPAP machine, and specialized size 15 shoes. And he dreams of having a place of his own, one where he doesn't need to worry about being robbed or hurt. And he's been told there's just no housing available. To the minister, what do I tell Robert? Where can he go for permanent housing, not a shelter?
The Honourable Minister of Seniors, Community and Social Services.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the very first thing we need to have stop is the NDP misleading Albertans. So the reality is, Mr. Speaker, that our shelter system has secure places for people's property, that our shelter systems have security, that the hardworking men and women who work each and every day in those shelter systems to keep care of the poor deserve better than that member and the official opposition continuing to stand in this chamber and cast doubt on the hard work that they do, Mr. Speaker. The reality is this: our shelter system is safe, it is available for people, and it will be there for care for people, Mr. Speaker, and we will continue to invest in housing at the same time, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Island Norwood.
Given that I'll support shelter staff every single day, and I'm so grateful for the work they do, but you need to be listening to the real life experiences of people like my constituents, like Margaret and Conrad, who are on fixed incomes. They experienced an unmanageable 20% increase in their rent. They lost their housing. Conrad uses a wheelchair due to suffering a stroke 6 years ago. Margaret is his caregiver, and after many months of searching for accessible housing, they haven't found a single thing that they can afford. So to the minister supposedly responsible for housing, when will he take action on astronomical rent increases and expand safe, affordable, and accessible housing options for Margaret, Conrad?
Order. While the Speaker is very sympathetic to the constituents in which you represent, I do think that it's important that the question is phrased in such a manner that it confines with the rules of the Assembly. The Honourable Minister of Seniors, Community and Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, this government, under the leadership of this Premier, has taken action on affordable housing from very day one of her leadership, Mr. Speaker. That is why we see record-breaking construction levels when it comes to housing. That is why we see purpose-built rentals increasing. That's why we see an unprecedented investment of $9 billion to create 82,000 more affordable houses and households across this province, Mr. Speaker. That's real action. When the NDP was in power, they saw affordability wait lists go up by 74%, Mr. Speaker, and they built under 1,000 affordable houses. We built that many this month, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Leduc Beaumont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A top priority for our UCP government is ensuring all Albertans have access to housing that meets their needs. Last week, our government announced a new online portal called Stop Housing Delays that will allow developers, municipalities, and other housing partners to report red tape and unnecessary home building delays. Can the Minister of Seniors, Community and Social Services please tell the House how the portal will help remove barriers so Alberta can continue building homes at a record pace?
The Honourable Minister of Seniors, Community and Social Services.
We heard loud and clear from industry that builds homes that the red tape that was put in place underneath the NDP government and created a situation where we were short 120,000 market houses underneath their leadership, Mr. Speaker, created an untenable situation. So this government focused on reducing that red tape, working side by side with industry, and it increased residential construction rates in our province by 34%. The new portal, Mr. Speaker, will create another avenue into government to communicate where more of those red tape blocks are happening either from our government or from municipal governments or other organizations, so we can continue to take action and create more homes in this great province, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Leduc Beaumont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the Minister for that answer. Given the importance of eliminating housing delays and the large number of factors that cause them, and further given that these factors may be the responsibility of different ministries, can the same minister please tell the House what measures are being implemented to ensure complaints are directed to the appropriate area of government so that meaningful solutions can be found?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we'll be using the same format we used that was put in place by the Honourable Minister of Red Tape to be able to make sure that we could reduce red tape across government when it comes to the information that we receive through the portal. We will then take action and or communicate with the appropriate level of government where action will have to be taken. We are confident that this will continue to be able to expand the great work that we've done, Mr. Speaker, which has already resulted, get this, Mr. Speaker, this year alone, 10,000 more apartment units in this province, Mr. Speaker, and we're seeing it work. Rent in Calgary, for example, just went down by 2.7%.
The Honourable Member for Leduc Beaumont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to the Minister, given that a key part of maintaining the Alberta advantage is our government's commitment to keeping the dream of home ownership alive, and given that increasing housing is the best way to stabilize costs and make housing more attainable for Albertans. Can the minister please update the House on the progress Alberta has made in increasing our housing supply?
Minister.
Honourable member is correct. The number one thing we need to do about maintaining affordability in our housing market in this province is to continue to increase supply. As I said, Mr. Speaker, we've increased supply by 34% in the residential construction industry this year alone. That is a record. The next time it was even closer, this was 1979. The number one thing, though, Mr. Speaker, that we have done is we have rejected the NDP's plan to bring in rent control that would collapse this industry, Mr. Speaker. And I want to point out the only provinces that have done that have seen their rental stock go down, their rents go up, more people be homeless, Mr. Speaker. Not this province. We continue to break records each and every month.
The honourable member for Edmonton City Centre.
Mr. Speaker, it used to be that when Albertans fell victim to crime, they had the comfort of knowing supports were available from people they knew in the community they lived in. But now that's gone, thanks to the UCP's decision to strip funding from local organizations who've done this work for decades in favor of regional hubs. We received reports that after a recent fatal motor vehicle accident near Westlock, victims and witnesses needed support. But when police called the minister's new 24-hour support intake, they were told there was no one available. To the Minister of Public Safety, what do you have to say to these victims who needed help but couldn't get it because you broke the system?
The Honourable the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank all those folks that are out there helping victims of crime and victims of tragedy. That's precisely why that we reorganize the system whereby we provide consistent funding throughout the province of Alberta, that we make sure that there is predictable and sustainable funding. And I can tell you that we certainly have support from many jurisdictions all throughout this province to make sure that victims of crime and victims of tragedy are getting the resources they need. Certainly, if he has an example of somebody who is not, we'll make sure that we address that.
The honourable member for Edmonton City Centre.
Given we've also received reports that following a domestic violence incident in Westlock, a mother and her one-year-old child were left by the side of the road. And given that police called Victim Services Regional Hub, who said they'd engage Victim Services in Slave Lake, but given that the woman needed formula for her child, stores were closed, she had no way to get to Slave Lake, police had to drive her there, taking an officer away from Westlock for 3 hours. To the minister, last month in an op-ed, you promised victims of crime or tragedy that your government would be there regardless of where they lived. 1 month later, what do you have to say to this mother and her child?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, that sounds very serious. And why is the member waiting till question period to let me know? This is something that he should be addressing with either me right away, letting the RCMP know, or letting the authorities know so that person can actually get the help that they need. I'm not going to play the political games that the members opposite are playing right now, Mr. Speaker. We're going to make sure that victims of crime, victims of tragedy are getting the supports that they need. And I can tell you, if there are people that are not, I need to know so we can address that issue.
The Honourable Order, the Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre.
Given that after 5 years of the UCP, Albertans outside Edmonton and Calgary can't count on being able to get the support of a family doctor, cancer treatment, or an emergency room. And given that thanks to the UCP, they also can't count on their children getting support in overcrowded classrooms in underfunded schools. And given the UCP has also made sure they can't count on having access to their pension, affordable electricity, and insurance, or even their right to vote. Losing support for victims of crime, I guess that's just the cherry on top. Mr. Speaker, is there any system this government won't make worse before Albertans get the chance to vote for better in 2027?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, none of what that member is saying is accurate, Mr. Speaker. I can tell you that we have support from many mayors, many we have support from people throughout the province of Alberta that say that they are finally getting the supports that they need. I can tell you that there were 14 municipalities all throughout the province of Alberta that were getting zero victim services, that were getting zero supports for victims of tragedy. We have now provided consistent funding. We provided predictable, sustainable funding. We're going to continue to support the people in rural Alberta, and we're not going to play the political games that they're playing on that side of the House, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Red Deer South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is a good day in Alberta. We live in one of the most beautiful places in the world, both in its places and its peoples. And many want to visit Alberta, a blessed land of freedom and prosperity. Tourism is big in Alberta, producing billions in visitor revenues, producing more than 260,000 jobs. To the Minister of Tourism and Sport, what news of our great tourist industry?
The Honourable the Minister of Tourism, Sport, the Government House Leader.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. What a time to be alive it is in Alberta because the tourism sector is booming. Mr. Speaker, in 2023, we saw $12.7 billion of visitor spend in this province, $3 billion of which came from international visitors, Mr. Speaker. That's a 20% increase because we're doing things right and our plan is working, Mr. Speaker. This record-setting year is a result of the hardworking entrepreneurs and the amazing people developing product and our partners who are bringing visitors into Alberta from around the country and from around the world. We're going to continue to show that Alberta is the best place to live, to play, and to visit.
The Honourable Member for Red Deer South.
Given Alberta's government has a super big goal for tourism to reach $25 billion in visitor spending by 2035, and given we just met with the industry at their annual Tourism Industry Association dinner, and given these subject matter experts have many insights for how tourism in Alberta can compete and excel, to the Minister, what say ye of how we are working with our tourist industry experts to reach this goal?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism Sport.
Well, Mr. Speaker, dare I say it's super duper to be in Alberta right now, Mr. What we're doing is we're listening. We joined the people at the Tourism Industry Association of Alberta dinner the other night with the Premier, and we spoke to them about the plan we have going forward, and we listened to what they want to see for the future in this province. One thing that's really important, Mr. Speaker, is four-season resorts. We've heard it from Albertans. They want to explore more of their backyard. We've heard it from Canadians, and we've heard it from international visitors. Everybody wants more Alberta, and Mr. Speaker, we're going to give it to them.
The Honourable Member.
Given that sports tourism is very big, driving major sporting events and sports fans across the world, and given that fans to major sporting events benefit local businesses and support upgrades to infrastructure, and given that Alberta is a great destination for sporting events and fans, and given it is good to see super duper Alberta athletes, to the Minister, what news of how we are supporting more sports tourism in Alberta?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Alberta has a rich history in sports and sport tourism, and that's why we continue to invest in bringing world-class attractions and events right here to the province of Alberta. We invested in the Canadian Founders Rodeo and saw record attendance, over $30 million of economic driving, and 5,500 jobs, Mr. Speaker. We also hosted another 20 more national and international sporting events through the Major Sporting Events Grant. And Mr. Speaker, all this drives interest in our province. All this drives people to come here, watch sporting events. And today, it's great to have some of Alberta's best right in the chamber and in the gallery as we welcome Olympians and Paralympians from around Alberta representing us on the international stage.
Order. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Gold Bar has a question to ask.
It sure pays to be friends with this government, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Minister of Energy quietly hiked the salaries at the AER. The chair now makes a very big $174,000 a year, and the board members now make a super duper $112,000 a year. This government had no problem hiking utility bills, auto insurance rates, income taxes, gas taxes, and more, Mr. Speaker. And who can forget the jobs minister who was cheered on by his colleagues when he refused to support minimum wage increases? Can the minister please explain to this House why people he puts on boards get big fat raises while Albertans pay more?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Yes, it is true, Mr. Speaker.
the industry is paying for the AER and all the raises that all the AER board members are receiving. We think it's fair that they should receive a competitive salary and wage for the time they put into what is a very important subject, Mr. Speaker. The oil and gas industry in Alberta last year brought in $183 billion. It's huge, Mr. Speaker. It pays for schools and hospitals and all sorts of infrastructure that people love. But, Mr. Speaker, there's no taxpayer money in that. It's for the AER, paid for by industry.
The honourable member for Edmonton Goldbar.
Well, given that if the minister bothered to read his budget, he would see a line item for $231 million that he pays out to operate the AER. And given that Chief Hearing Commissioner got a pay increase from $248,000 to $258,000 this year, and given that the government ran on making life more affordable, only they forgot to mention that it's only for their best friends, can the minister explain how on one hand he says that minimum wage earners work enough, but AER board members need a big fat pay raise?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
I think I explained, Mr. Speaker, that the big fat pay raise was paid by the industry that they oversee, Mr. Speaker. It's not paid for by taxpayers. Now, it's done by way of a levy, Mr. Speaker, and it's true that sometimes the government has to supply the money before it's paid for by industry because that's the way it works, but it's still paid for by industry, Mr. Speaker, and I would be happy to sit down with the member opposite and any members of the NDP to explain this journal entry operation clearly and succinctly.
The honourable member.
Given that the minister spent $20 million more than he took in from the industry to operate the AER last year, and given that Alberta has the lowest minimum wage in Canada at $15, why does the minister think that his chair and board members need a salary equal to 6 times the minimum wage, while minimum wage earners get nothing?
The Honourable Minister.
As I mentioned, Mr. Speaker, these salaries are competitive. In fact, I would suggest they're less than competitive. They're at the same rate that the NDP were paying some 7 or 8 years ago, Mr. Speaker. These people do very important work for the people of Alberta, Mr. Speaker, and it's paid for by the industry that they oversee. Now, Mr. Speaker, I can't think of a better thing for the taxpayers of Alberta than the way we are managing this particular file. It's being done properly, Mr. Speaker, and it's done in the best interest of Albertans.
The honourable member for Banff, Kananaskis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The new Alberta Nature Strategy will recognize and communicate the value of nature and the importance of biodiversity. But Alberta already has a biodiversity framework. The Nature Strategy will recognize our dependence on a healthy environment. But we already have regional land use plans designed to do that. We just haven't completed or implemented them. The Nature Strategy will draw from Indigenous wisdom and worldviews, but we already have processes for that too. To the Minister of Environment and Protected Areas, how is the Nature Strategy new when these programs already exist?
The Honourable the Minister of Environment and Protected Areas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm actually very grateful to the member for the question. Just recently, we were able to host our first ever Nature Strategy Summit, which brought together a number of stakeholders from all different industries and communities across our province, and they had said that this is the first time that they've ever been brought together in such a way to discuss exactly these types of items. Mr. Speaker, this is a great opportunity for us to protect this area of provincial jurisdiction when it comes to designating our provincial lands, protecting us from federal overreach, and striking a vision for us moving forward.
The honourable member.
Well, given that the stakeholders that I spoke with that were at that consultation didn't actually think it was that meaningful or effective, given that the nature strategy is meant to respond to global biodiversity interests and replace the federal nature strategy, given that the federal nature strategy emphasizes the efforts of all Canadians across political lines and jurisdictions to address biodiversity loss and climate change, given that the Minister of EPA is using this nature strategy as another excuse to pick a fight with Ottawa rather than advance environmental protections in collaboration with all, is this really about protecting Alberta biodiversity?
The Honourable the Minister of Environment and Protected Areas.
Mr. Speaker, I'm certain that some of the NGOs that the members opposite might have spoken to are opposed to talking about economics and affordability for everyday Canadians, or having hunters, fishers, ranchers, agricultural producers as part of those discussions. We need to have a balanced discussion. It matters. It matters to Albertans, Mr. Speaker, that we balance environment, economic growth, affordability for Albertans, and of course, making sure that we are protecting our provincial jurisdiction when it comes to biodiversity goals.
Honourable member.
And most of the time when we talk about balancing these interests, it actually means dismissing environmental concerns. Given that our existing programs to protect our environment are okay, but not always enforced or adequately funded, given that we continually lose more wetlands than we restore, we add species to the at-risk list every year, we lose critical habitat every day, and water for communities continues to be polluted. But hey, we'll have a nature strategy report to sit on a shelf somewhere. Given that from where I sit, it appears the minister's lack of on-the-ground action is actually the biggest risk to protecting Alberta's environment. Where is the
Honourable Minister of Environment?
Mr. Speaker, unlike the members opposite, we are proud of our province. We are leaders in conservation while we continue to be a beacon of hope and a place that people continue to choose to call home and grow their businesses in all of our major industries, Mr. Speaker. We are leaders in conservation. More than 60% of our lands are public lands, and a large portion of these lands make up working landscapes used by farmers, by ranchers, and conservationists who have helped us steward our environments for decades and will continue to help us steward our environments for decades yet to come.
The Honourable Member for Calgary East has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our universal, accessible, publicly funded health care is highly regarded in the world. As the government works to enhance health care, Albertans deserve access to high quality and timely, equitable medical services. To the Minister, how will refocusing healthcare in Alberta intend to reduce wait times in the emergency rooms and speed up the treatment of the most serious cases? Good question.
The Honourable Minister of Health has risen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Refocusing Alberta's healthcare system will ensure that all Albertans have access to the most effective care and frontline service delivery. Mr. Speaker, we recognize long wait times at emergency departments are not acceptable. Speeding up access to care, particularly with primary care, and decreasing emergency department wait times continues to be one of our top priorities, and it is a key element of refocusing healthcare. We'll continue to add more frontline staff and make necessary changes so that we can further bring down wait times right across the province, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Calgary East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Minister. Given the increasing demand among Albertans, including in Calgary East, for improvements to the healthcare system, and given that Albertans are advocating that their health needs must be met promptly and effectively, including our timely access to needed surgeries. To the same minister, what measures have been implemented to reduce wait times for surgeries in Alberta?
Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, our government is committed to bringing down those surgery wait times and having more surgeries done in clinically approved timeframes. Budget 2024 is investing $305 million in Alberta surgical initiatives to support 310,000 surgeries in the 24-25 fiscal year, and we have $313 million over 3 years allocated towards renovating and adding operating rooms and centres right across the province. We're also utilizing our chartered surgical facilities, adding more than 6,000 orthopedic surgeries this year and more to come.
The Honourable Member.
Mr. Speaker and Minister, given that the respiratory season is underway and that there will be increase on the demands and capacity challenges to our healthcare system, and given that health workers would be under enormous strain to deliver the care that Albertans deserve, can the Minister please provide Albertans programs that support our resilient and highly trained health workforce?
The Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we're very proud of our workforce. They're doing a tremendous job, particularly under strain. As we go through this respiratory virus season, we're continuing to work with our post-secondaries to train more physicians, more nurses, more healthcare aides. We've added many programs, including the Rural Remote Northern program, and we're also recruiting more physicians and retaining more physicians and nurse practitioners in rural areas. Actually, I just announced yesterday the upgrade upgrades and the updates to our nurse practitioner program. We also have the new rural and remote bursary program for family medicine resident physicians. We've got many programs.
Honourable members, this concludes the time allotted for oral question period. I understand that on a very rare occasion, there may be some consent amongst members for a request from unanimous consent. It's even rarer to do it during the daily routine, but perhaps we'll make the exception.
I appreciate that, Mr. Speaker. I do rise to request unanimous consent of the Assembly to revert back to introduction of guests.
Members, this is a request for unanimous consent. I will ask only one question. Is there anyone opposed? If so, indicate now. Unanimous consent has been granted. The Honourable the Government House Leader has an introduction.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is my distinct honor to rise, introduce to you and to all members of the Assembly sitting in the gallery, Alberta's 2024 Olympic and Paralympic athletes. This past summer in Paris, on the world's biggest stage, they showed us the power of sport and its ability to bring people together. Today, we express our pride and our gratitude for their achievements. These outstanding people are more than just athletes. They're role models, ambassadors, and the sources of hope for communities across our province. They inspire us to dream bigger, work harder, and believe in the extraordinary. I want to invite them to rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of this Assembly, please.
Honourable members, in 30 seconds or less, we will continue with the remainder of the daily routine. For those of you traveling home today, please do so safely.
All right, so I have about 30 seconds, I guess, to go through the order of the day. So, again, we just saw the introductions of stuff. They ended up doing a question period. I just want to kind of go through. So essentially what they should be doing now is going through the government bills and orders. And of course, we are looking at the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment, Bill 24. I thought we'd be starting now. Oh, there you go. I'll go back to this.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I present today to the House this petition of 1,300 signatures gathered over the summer at events in Calgary Foothills, demanding the Sage Hill Concora Middle School in Calgary Foothills.
Notices of motions, introduction of bills, tabling returns and reports.
For Cypress Medicine Hat has a tabling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise with 5 copies of an article calling out, again, the federal government's gun grab as nothing but a red herring and the biggest confiscation of property.
Are there other tablings? Ooh. Seeing none.
Tablings to the clerk. I wish to advise the Assembly that the following document was deposited with the Office of the Clerk on behalf of Honourable Mr. Horner, President of Treasury Board and Minister of Finance, pursuant to the Provincial Judges and Applications Judges Registered and Unregistered Pension Plans Regulation. Provincial Judges and Applications Judges Registered and Unregistered Pension Plans 2022-23 Annual Report. Deferred divisions.
Honourable members, there was no points of order. And a gold star for everyone. Orders of the day. Orders du jour.
Government motions. Motion number 51, Honourable Mr. Scow.
The Honourable the Deputy Government House Leader.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the Government House Leader, I'd like to move motion 51, which reads as follows. Be it resolved that pursuant to Standing Order 4 sub 1 and for the duration of the 2024 fall sitting for the first session of the 31st Legislature, the Assembly shall meet on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday evenings for the consideration of government business unless the Government House Leader notifies the Assembly that there shall be no evening sittings that day or by providing notice under notices of motion in the daily routine or at any time prior to 6 p.m.
Honourable members, the Honourable the Deputy Government House Leader has moved government motion number 51. This is not a debatable motion pursuant to Standing Order 4.1. Having heard the motion as proposed by the Deputy Government House Leader, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered.
Committee of the Whole.
Everybody have their popcorn ready? This is what we're waiting for. I'm just going to listen to it, and maybe I'll butt in every now and then with a comment. But let's just see what's going to happen.
You call the committee to order, and before the committee is Bill 24, Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act. Are there any members wishing to speak to the bill? I recognize the member from Bonnyville Cold Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I stand today to introduce an amendment to Bill 24 to the House.
Yep, this is it. This is it. This is it. Do I sound excited? I shouldn't be.
This amendment will be referred to as Amendment A5. Member from Bonnyville Cold Lake St. Paul can proceed.
I'm introducing an amendment to the reasonable limit clause in the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act 2024. This amendment reads, myself to move that Bill 24, Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act 2024, be amended in section 4, subsection C as follows. A, in the proposed section 1, subsection 2, by striking out demonstrably justified and substituting demonstrably and proportionally justified based on evidence. B, in the proposed section 1, subsection 3, by striking out demonstrably justified and substituting demonstrably and proportionally justified.
Proportionally. I wonder what Leighton Gray would say about that.
This amendment will add the words proportionately and based on evidence to the proposed reasonable limits clause contained in the Alberta Bill of Rights. The first change, adding proportionally, will clarify that limits on rights should be subjected to proportionality analysis under what's known as the Oakes test. This will require a government to show that limitations of rights pursues a pressing and substantial objective. That limitation is rationally connected to an objective, that it limits rights as little as reasonably possible, and that the effects of the limitation are proportional to the objective. The second change, adding based on evidence, will clarify that if a law is challenged and found to limit rights, the government bears the burden of putting forward any evidence that is necessary to demonstrate that the limitation of rights is justified. By including a reasonability limits clause based on the Oakes test, this bill will set a higher bar for justifying the limit on rights that is currently the case under the court decision interpreting the Alberta Bill of Rights. We introduced the original amendment in response to concerns we have heard in recent years about the government placing limitations on Albertans' rights. Mr. Chair, like the proposed amendment I brought forward today, the entire set of changes to the Alberta Bill of Rights is to make sure this important civil rights document continues to protect Albertans from government action that reasonably limits their rights now and into the future. As we have heard in the House, the proposed changes, including this amendment, responds to concerns that many members have heard from their constituents. I actively solicited opinions from my constituents, and I'm pleased to say that both I and the government of Alberta have listened to their concerns. I have heard from many Albertans and groups supporting civil and speech rights and freedoms. My office has received numerous emails with suggestions and ideas. Thank you so much. And I've heard them loud and clear. Albertans have expressed concerns about being coerced to receive medical treatments, Mr. Chair. The proposed amendments to the Bill of Rights includes this House amendment addresses these concerns with added protections for medical consent and the right not to be compelled or coerced into violations of their bodily autonomy. As we have heard in this House, Albertans also raised concerns about the federal government's firearms confiscation program and how this restricts their rights and freedoms when it comes to lawful firearm ownership. Our government is committed to standing up for lawful firearm owners in Alberta and affirms our intent that provincial laws should not interfere with the right to legally acquire, keep and use firearms, Mr. Chair. Some have said that the proposed amendments are merely symbolic, and I expect that we might hear that again today from the NDP as this debate plays out. I believe Albertans who care about their rights and freedoms and feel these rights have not always been respected would disagree. Protections for personal autonomy, freedom of expression, property rights, firearm rights, and more effective enforcement of rights will provide Albertans with protections against government actions that infringe on their rights. With that, Mr. Speaker, I encourage everyone to support this amendment to this bill.
Are there any others wishing to make comment? The Honourable Minister of Justice has risen to speak.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I've really appreciated the debate, the robust conversations that we've had on this amendment, on the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act 2024 in its entirety. I want to take this opportunity to thank the member for Bonnyville, Cold Lake, St. Paul for bringing forward this amendment. As you know, Mr. Chair, this is the first time that a significant update to the Alberta Bill of Rights has been undertaken since 1972. This is important work. It's something that I know many of us have been hearing from our constituents. I want to thank everyone for sharing their viewpoints on this bill and for your commitment to ensuring that Albertans have the most robust civil rights document and that their rights and freedoms are respected in this province. With that, Mr. Chair, I will echo my government colleagues and encourage everyone to support this amendment and this bill. This time, I'd like to motion to adjourn debate.
Having heard the motion as proposed by the Honourable Minister of Justice to adjourn debate and report progress on Bill 24 when the committee rises, are you agree? Any opposed? That is carried.
I love how all this works out. We
would have under consideration Bill 30, Service Alberta Statutes Amendment Act. Are there any comments, questions, or amendments to be offered with respect to this bill? Member for Edmonton Meadows has risen to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to rise in the House to speak to Bill 30.
Keep watching this and
Service Alberta Statutes Amendment Act
a couple of MLAs,
2024.
other people that I know, and see what their take is. But basically, they basically changed the wording.
I wanted to say in starting that I do support
demonstrably and
changes proposed in this bill.
Something to that effect,
has been
just makes it slightly better. Slightly.
For
We'll
many years.
We'll talk about this a little bit
By
later.
the industry,
and I'll report back.
Construction industry and condominium corporations. So the few things this bill is doing, it's basically amending 3 acts: the Condominium Property Act, the Prompt Payment and Construction Lien Act, the Public Works Act.
Yeah, essentially it is on hold. The bill
around condominium
still, I guess, back in
Property Act.
It is not passed.
It is proposing
understand
to
so
create another condominium property
question.
Tribunal to add another option to the condominium owners and related parties. In case of disputes, they will have another option. Before, they were just bound by the narrow scope. In lack of resolutions, they could only go to the court. In the court, we know is not only lengthy process, but in many cases that I'm concerned about all three amendments under this bill, that what we're trying to ease is to save people's time and trying to help resolute the issues the industry is facing or that happens or occurs. But at the same time, there is no really follow-up process for the industry's stakeholders or the individuals. Under the Prompt Payment and Construction Lien Act, I think we are debating this in the House for at least 3 times, I remember that, in the last 4 years. The issue is still pertaining. Sometime we have to discuss this to bring in line with other government laws. And sometimes there are issues that we hear from the stakeholders. So it is changing to 28 days, the payment rules from the day of notice. And the payment to subcontractors in 35 days, and the subcontract to subcontractor payments 42 days. So from the industry practices, the first-hand stories and my dealings, it's a bit of concerning to me. So why we are creating those different segments for these individuals, because they are less effective or powerful. No clue, like what is the reason? If the contractor needs to be paid in 28 days, why the subcontractor for 35 days? And then subcontractors, from subcontractors, another 42 days. If the money is in your account, then those people needs to get paid. So if contractors' operations are affected by not receiving the payments on time, so do the people working on the next level of the operation. So I would really like to see some explanation from the ministry. So what kind of feedback he had? Like, is this either the only one stakeholder's lobby we are working on, or we are trying to address the whole issue in the industry? So that is very important to know. The other thing I really wanted to say, I hear stories from both sides. Like, I ran my own business, small scale business, where I dealt with thousands of people in 20 years. And they would share their stories. They were in construction industries, they were in trucking industry, they were in a number of different businesses. But same concerns. You had a job to do, you contracted the work. That's another issue, actually. The biggest issue in the industry is legally, the contract is contractor. Either it's written or it's verbal contract. But there's a huge issue about when it comes to getting paid. So then your agreement on verbal issues is a big problem. So clarities on those things do matter. Also, I don't know if the concerns that industry shares is exactly is the responsibility of the service ministry or not. But as a house, as an elected member, it's my duty to bring those feedbacks back to the house. And there are also the project owners. In many cases, the big and effective project owners have a different kind of power or control when it comes to get their projects completed, when it comes to making payments to their contractors, compared to the smaller project owners or the individuals who are getting their work completed. And when their job is not 100% completed, they are just left in the limbo. So no one comes to fix those small problems. Those could be big for the small business owner to complete the job. So there has been stories where the contractor walked away with the money, but never showed up to complete their jobs. And the people are left with no options, no choices, to look for other people and to work with those professionals. They're not willing to take on someone else's work. And the other thing I really want to say, but I hear from my constituents, the community leagues, and what has been the biggest concern. I'm happy to see the scope of this bill is, expanded to the crown corporations, but also government need to invest into communities, into government projects, infrastructures, where we can create more jobs, where we can just, help economy going, where we can create more work. We had examples like Calgary Green Lines, very devastating effects. And me and my colleagues in Millwards, three of us, member from Edmonton Millwards, member from Edmonton Alersley, we do attend Millwards President Council's meetings. So one of the biggest concerns in the last 4 years, constantly keep coming up is there's no funding available from the grant programs that used to exist. Their infrastructure is deteriorating. Their projects are planned, but they're not going anywhere because the government has cut the grant programs, even that was CFIF or any other grant programs. So that is impacting communities, that is impacting our constituents. So government also needs to work simultaneously, same time, on those fronts if we want to build a vibrant and healthy community, and if we want to promote fairness in the system. After all, when we are creating this is a good reason, and I see this is a good amendment. That's why I'm supporting, but by creating this legislation is not gonna be the problem solved. So it doesn't mean if there are 28 days or 35 days, somebody issues notice and now they're gonna start getting paid before they were not because there was lack of just clarity. No, this is not the only case. The bad actors are bad actors. The reason why saying our judicial system is very costly and expensive. It is not accessible to everyone. We need to make it to the reach of every single Albertans. I can go on and list number of genuine cases where everyone knows that who is right and what the challenges are, where the problem is, but the problems are not solved because the vulnerable party does not have resources to access the system to get the justice. So this is a very big problem in this province. So with that, I conclude my remarks. I hope when we discuss next time, we can expand the scope of these amendments to other operations in the industry as well. Thank you.
Are there any others wishing to speak? Member from Edmonton Decor has risen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise to speak to Bill 30, Service Alberta Statute Amendment Act. And I will speak to the element related to prompt payment and the implications that it has on Albertans if we don't close the existing loopholes. 36% of people in Edmonton are renters. So basically, I'm talking about 360,000 renters in the capital region. What that means, these are people who have experienced an increasing rent. These are people who struggle in terms of making sure that they don't lose their existing shelters if rent is delayed, because the next step to that is the process of eviction. And what that means is that, Mr. Chair, this impacts entirely our system and its interconnectedness. So that is what we need to create, safeguards that will protect people from falling into that houselessness. And one of the things that we can create is people get payments on time and prompt payment, and that is why I feel it is so important to ensure workers are paid on time to avoid the consequence of that not happening. And that can only happen in the situation where there are loopholes within existing systems. And this legislation is the area where we need to address. Mr. Chair, as we know that the province is facing, is now the highest, based on the data from yesterday, experiencing the highest inflation rate. And cities of Edmonton and Calgary have the highest in the country. In fact, higher than Vancouver, which is a very expensive city, and higher than an inflation that is higher than Toronto, which is so expensive. So what that means is that any situation that puts people, workers, into a situation where they cannot meet their financial obligations, they fall into difficulties. So
I'm not going to belittle what else they're talking about right now, but what I'm going to do, I got to turn down volumes on both sides. Hopefully you can just hear me and not hear anything else going on in the background. So kind of just digging into a few things. I'm going to see if I can just copy and paste what I'm looking at for people to be watching here. Give me 1 second here. And if I lose the screen that's up there, that's not a big deal. I will deal with that after. what I basically want to do is grab this one. And let's see if I can share that onto there. There we go. That's basically what I want to do. So today, this is, if you go to, and I'll copy and paste that and put that into the comments as well. Actually, I'm not even sure if I can paste that into the comments right now because I'll put it up there. This is the document that kind of goes through what's happening at the legislature. It's an agenda. So here you can actually see the date today, what the order paper is. If you click on that, that was the agenda of what was being talked about today, yada, yada. I put that up already. But if we go down through the bill status over on the right side here, and we look under Bill 24, then we can actually see that today it was adjourned on the Committee of the Whole. I don't think I have to make that bigger for people to see it. But what I'm more concerned about or more interested in is if you can see after each day, they put in a transcript. And in some cases, they actually put the entire day transcript. So here, if you go to October 24th, that's the entire day. But if you just want to see what they're talking about in terms of the actual bill that's being presented, it will be here. So as you can see, the transcript hasn't been written today to get that actual wording and kind of what was said after with Mickey Amory, as well as Scott Sear, who presented it. And so with that, I don't know if we can actually make any more comments until I want to reread that thing again. I just got a text from Mitch Sylvester. He says he now has it, but the lawyers are looking at it. So with that, that's kind of all I really cared about watching today. I'm going to keep this on. Once the transcript comes out and we're able to look at it, by all means, everyone will be able to take a look at it. Again, I will copy and paste the URL so that you can all get a hold of it. And then we'll just wait for the transcript to come up. I honestly don't know what time that transcript shows up. Maybe it shows up tonight. Maybe it shows up first thing in the morning. I don't know. I'll watch it probably once an hour or so. And then once I get it, then I will try and post it so that we have an idea what the wording is. But as of right now, it's slightly better in terms of not saying demonstrably justified, demonstrably, and if anybody was listening to it, I should have written better notes. My apologies. But I'm busy working, as most people probably are. So if you are listening to this, great. Thank you so much for your attention and for your support for at least taking a few moments out of your day to see what's going on in terms of the Bill of Rights. Very important. I was actually out at a location today and fixing an audio system, as I usually do. And one of our fellow friends, followers, basically was asking me, so what was going on? And I told her what was happening with the Bill of Rights. And again, she's too busy, tending to her family and making a living and all that that it is difficult for them to find out what exactly is going on. And so she said, thank you to Chris and myself for doing what we're doing. And at least trying to stay on top of these things as best as we can possibly do. And I'm certainly not one to ever ask for any donations other than if we're part of another group like the Alberta Prosperity Project. Could always rely on donations. The Alberta First Pension Group could. I Am Albertan, which is another group that I'm involved with. We all ask for donations. This, what you're seeing right here, is not even part of any of that. And if you like what we're doing, great. Please support us however you can. And that's kind of all I'm going to say about that. If you can go to TheChris&KerryShow.com. There is a link there if you want to make a donation. That would be great. That helps us to be able to basically bring this type of information to you. Everything that you see on screen costs money to do. From the computer itself to the web server to hosting to the camera to you name it, everything all costs money. And I'm doing this. Chris and I both do this just because we want to bring this this vital information, I think, to you. And I'm pretty sure Chris and I have already had a conversation about this earlier, that we want to do another kind of catch-up show, what things have happened in the last little while, and kind of bring you up to speed on this. So much has happened in the last couple of months, personally, professionally, business-wise, etc., including Chris's class action, which is now certified. It's under the Chris Scott and Rebecca Ingram. And we really haven't even done a show on that. We've announced that that's a good thing, but we haven't even been able to do anything with Jeff Rath and company to bring that to your attention. So anyways, there's lots of things on the go. But again, all I really wanted to do is just to bring up the Bill of Rights. And once we get this presented, I will definitely come on and tell you a little bit more. Maybe we'll even get Mitch Sylvester or Leighton Gray or somebody else that might know a little bit more about this. So all it is they've changed the wording on it. So instead of demonstrably justified, demonstrably and available, or whatever the actual terminology is, just slightly better. Basically, it means that it has to kind of go through an actual committee or some sort of process to decide whether or not it's demonstrably, as opposed to what happened, of course, during COVID, when they basically said, well, the world is shutting down, so we might as well just follow suit with that without any actual looking into it. We're still waiting for any rules out there, anything that actually said, yeah, the COVID jab did so much better for people, and wearing masks saved 12% more people, and staying 6 feet apart saved 76%. I don't know. I'm making those numbers up, but we have yet to receive any of that sort of stuff. And I think that's one of the reasons why this class action, at least for the business owners, is going through. And that's through Jeff Rath, and Leighton Gray is doing his own based on vaccine injuries and vaccine people that were wrongfully dismissed or basically, lost their job temporarily because they refused to take the jab. So anyways, that's all I can tell you about that right now. And once we find out more about the Bill of Rights, I will definitely let you know. I'm going to keep this going on. If I find out any more, I'll pop in every now and then. And otherwise, I will hopefully talk to you guys a little bit later. So in the meantime, I'm going to see if I can go back to this. If I lose you, don't worry about it. Just stay on the line. And I say that all the time. Just stay here, and I'll get this working in a second.
2008, I took the step of joining the condo board in my building. This is an experience I think that many Albertans have had. Some might call it a baptism by fire. Certainly it is, perhaps serving on a condo board is one of the chief things which deters people from further explorations into the world of political representation. But what I can say, is it is an essential part of ownership in a condominium building. We have to have some form of governance. And so certainly we have systems that have been set up here in the province over the years, and there are the elections and there are all those pieces. So it is democratic. But the challenge, Mr. Chair, is that, unlike ourselves, where we have some very robust systems in place to conduct our elections, to ensure that things are done properly, to provide resolution to dispute. Indeed, the fact that we're here in this chamber today, just look around at all of the supports, the services, the staff that are here to support us in doing our work as representatives. When it comes to condominium boards, those individuals are volunteering their time and have a very limited level of support. They have their property management company, and those will be of admittedly varying qualities, some better than others in terms of the level of support they're able to provide, and based on the budget that they're able to have in terms of the condo fees that are collected. And it can be a very challenging thing to oversee, Mr. Chair, in a volunteer position for individuals who don't necessarily themselves have deep education in the legalities and all the different pieces of the Condo Act. Again, property management company is there to provide some of that support. But it is a big job. And it can be very significant because in many of these cases, when you're talking about these larger buildings, you're dealing with hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of dollars of investment. Not to mention the challenges that come then when repairs need to be made, for the furnace or boiler needs to be replaced, the balconies, special assessments. Essentially, they're being asked to do the work we do without the support of a party, without the support of a lot of this infrastructure. Mr. Chair, you know, we've all heard the tenor of the conversations when there's talk from a provincial government about raising taxes. Imagine what it's like for those folks on those condominium boards when they have to deal with the fact that pieces of their infrastructure are crumbling and there is no way to pay for it other than to levy a special assessment. It can be challenging, Mr. Chair, and I know I've been in those shoes and I've sat in that chair. From the other side, Mr. Chair, it can be challenging in a condominium building as an owner. When you have bought into that property, when you may not necessarily have a position on that board, it's possible that in the election of the people that are on the board, you did not get the people elected to that board that you'd hoped. You can have varying levels of success in terms of the communication that's available, the quality of that representation, your relationship with the property management company. And of course, these are all individuals, Mr. Chair, who are also just trying to go about their lives, who are working full-time jobs, have families, have all sorts of other responsibilities. And again, they themselves are likely not lawyers who are well versed in the ins and outs of the legalities of the Condominium Act. So there's a lot to negotiate in this, Mr. Chair, and there's a lot of opportunities for there to be conflicts, misunderstanding, miscommunication, and indeed, Mr. Chair, as we know, I think in all systems of governance, there is the opportunity for bad actors who make poor decisions that don't actually reflect what is in the best interest of the people that they are representing. So the challenge then, Mr. Chair, is how do we resolve those situations? Well, for a lot of years, Alberta has been a bit of an outlier in that generally the only recourse people have outside of reaching out to their board members, trying to use the systems that are in place, reaching out to the property management company, outside of that, if they came to an impasse, their only choice, their only decision they could make was to go to court. And Mr. Chair, that is an incredibly difficult, daunting, expensive thing. Imagine if you are the owner of a condominium, you're hit with a special assessment of tens of thousands of dollars. If you want to dispute that, if you have a concern with that or with anything, the only way to resolve that, if you cannot do so through the proper channels, is then to spend tens of thousands of dollars more to go through court. Or if you've been levied a fine and you have a dispute with that. Because again, Mr. Chair, there are no systems available. If I get a traffic fine, I have the opportunity, I can go to court and I can plead my case. There's a traffic court. Hey, I can just go and see a justice of the peace and not even have to go through the whole court process to discuss and talk about that traffic ticket, raise my concerns, perhaps reduce the fine or get it taken away. If I receive a fine from my condominium corporation up until now, and I dispute that fine, I can write to the board, I can write to the property management company, but if I want to dispute it beyond that, if they are not amenable to hearing what I have to say, my only choice then is to spend thousands more dollars to actually go to court. And this is not practical, Mr. Chair. It's not good for our court system to have to handle those kinds of minor affairs if they could be resolved in a different way. We already know our court systems are significantly backlogged. They're under a good deal of pressure. It's not good for the individual. It's not good for the court system. So, Mr. Chair, we needed an alternative. So years back, we had a bill that sort of came in that was amending the Condominium Act. It was hanging around when we came into government. We inherited it. We worked through it and we put it through. And I know that at that time, one of the things that folks had already heard in the consultations done by the previous Progressive Conservative government, folks had said, we need an alternative. And there was a lot of talk about having a condominium tribunal. Not dissimilar to, Mr. Chair, to what we have for, residents and tenants and landlords. Residential tenancy and landlords body that we have to help settle disputes outside of the court system. It's a reasonable thing, Mr. Chair, and it was a good idea. And I remember those amendments were made, and there was a timeline I recall being laid out. And later in that timeline was the idea that there would be steps taken towards creating a condominium tribunal, providing a lower cost, easier to access system before the courts where folks could go to resolve these issues, get a decision, clear the air. And I can tell you, Mr. Chair, at that time, when that came forward, I heard from a lot of my constituents who were very excited by that prospect. Because it's interesting, Mr. Chair, one of the things that we do get in my office is correspondence from folks who are in exactly this situation.
So
who
for those
are on the board and
still
have
watching,
concerns
again, I
or
don't
issues
mean
with
to
another
cut
board
them
member
off,
or with
I
another.
mean, we were on here specifically to there you go, to talk about the Bill of Rights. So I do want to talk about that. I'm just gonna bring up that one screen again, which is oops, just a second. Bloop, 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 bloop. No, we don't want that. There you go. Again, to bring up the dashboard, I put that into the link or into the conversation, the comments. I don't even know what I'm saying. The comments section right now. It's under Legislative Assembly dashboard. This is the dashboard. This will be exactly what we'll be looking at later on with the agenda, which is the order paper here. And then if you scroll down to Bill, my mouse is not working here. If we scroll down to Bill 24 and the Alberta Bill of Rights, we will see the order, the actual document, the actual Bill of Rights as it was put in at the beginning when they were talking about it. The first reading, second reading, committee of the whole, what the transcript was, and then again what happened today. And again, that was adjourned, and it happened so fast. If you were watching it live, I think it was less than 5 minutes. Now I could be wrong, but basically, Scott Sear, who is the MLA for, I forget exactly, but it's Bonnyville, St. Paul, and he was the one that basically introduced the comments about the committee of the whole, and then the Justice Minister Mickey Amory came on and said, yeah, this is what we're talking about, and then it was put back into the committee of the whole, which we're assuming just means that it's been paused. So what I will do is I'll paraphrase as best as I can the actual what was said, and so this is from Scott Sear, the MLA for Bonnyville. Dear Sir, Madam Chair, obviously would be dear Mr. Speaker, like the proposed amendment I brought forward today, the entire set of changes to the Bill of Rights is to make sure this important civil rights document continues to protect Albertans from government action that unreasonably limits their rights now and into the future. The government bears the burden of putting forward any evidence that is necessary to demonstrate that the limitation of rights is justified. So basically, the wording has come in that basically says the government needs to prove that is justified, unlike what happened with COVID, where they just did it, right? And again, if you've been watching for the last little bit, we talked about whether or not they've even come forward with anything to say, yeah, the jabs saved so many people, or the masks saved so many people, social distancing, plexiglass, you name it. If any of that stuff even did anything, and we're still waiting on that. So basically, it says the government needs to do this. So continuing on, by including reasonable limits clause based on the Oakes test. So the Oakes test is, I have to almost look back at my notes, it was basically done by a Supreme Court decision. I'll paraphrase that. It basically says that they created the Supreme Court of Canada created a general framework for deciding whether government action infringes a charter right is justified. So that's called the Oakes test, based upon the court's decision with Oakes obviously being one of them. I digress now. So by including reasonable limits clause based on the Oakes test, this bill will set a higher bar for justifying a limit on rights that is currently the case under the court decisions interpreting the Alberta Bill of Rights. This will require a government to show that a limitation of rights pursues a pressing and substantial objective, that the limitation is rationally connected to that objective, that it limits rights as little as reasonably possible, and that the effects of limitation are proportional to its objective. Blah, blah, blah. Somebody said word salad. That's legalese. That's word salad. So the second change is, instead of being demonstrably justified, as is in Charter, the Charter of Rights and Freedom in Section 1, they're changing it to be the second change, adding based on evidence. So you see what they actually did there. So instead of just being demonstrably justified, everyone, the government says it's true, so it must be true. They're saying based on evidence. So it's up to the government in order to show that evidence. And again, my face mask, plexiglass, blah, blah, blah. So it says the second change, adding based on evidence, will clarify that if law is challenged and found to limit rights. This amendment will add the words proportionally, that's the word I thought it was, and based on evidence to the proposed reasonable limits clause contained in the Alberta Bill of Rights. The first change, adding proportionately, will clarify that limits on rights should be subject to a proportionality analysis under what is known as the Oakes test. So there you go. So it's better than just being demonstrably justified, because again, the government can just say, nope, that's just the way it is. Here, there's a bit of a litmus test to say it's proportionally and based on evidence. So I think that's good, and we'll find out a little bit more about that as we go forward. It seems to be better. I'm going to let the legalese guys jump into that. But again, if you want to find out what that actual portion was that Scott Sear read, and even what I read, again, that's through text and stuff on here. I could probably copy and paste. But again, that is more just roughly there. It's probably 99% sure, but I actually don't want to post that until we find out. And the only way that we can do that is if you look at the screen, you go to the dashboard either later today or tomorrow, and then we will look back at this window and we will actually see what the transcript was that was said, as well as what Mickey Amory replied back with, because I don't have that either. So a little bit of information. There you go. I'll answer a question. Marianne says, but we have seen that evidence depends on who is in government. And that's very true. That is very true as of right now. I mean, Justin Trudeau and even when Kenny was in power, they basically said, no, this is demonstrably justified. That's just the way it is. And so please keep wearing your mask, and you are not going to be allowed into anywhere without a vaccine passport. I don't even know what a vaccine passport is. That's a direct quote from Jason Kenney. So it's true. It depends on who the government is and how it's done. But if they at least apply the Oakes test to say that this is demonstrably justified based and proportionally based upon the evidence, I'm not going to say it's better, leaps and bounds or magnitude better, but I think it's probably better than just saying demonstrably justified, because again, even the conversation we had with Leighton Gray a couple of weeks ago in regards to the wording, the problem with demonstrably justified is that's what was listed in the charter, and essentially the charter got trampled on, as well as horses and little old ladies and wheelchairs. So we're not going to take that in the Bill of Rights, but this makes it proportionally and based on evidence is slightly better. To what extent that based on evidence does, and if there's a timeline that, and there's so many of these irregularities when it comes to the English language. So we'll just have to see exactly what that means. That's all I'm going to say about it right now, because I am definitely not a lawyer, and we will talk with some lawyers and find out what their take is on all this. So with that, I'm going to go back to watching the Dog and Pony Show, also known as the Alberta Legislature. So if you guys want to keep watching with me, great. And as I find out anything more, I'm going to jump on here and let you know. And this might be the last time, because until I actually get this transcript, I may not be able to report anymore. So in the meantime, you guys have a great day, and maybe I'll see you again. Maybe I'll see you again. There you go. We'll do this.
Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and New Brunswick have already implemented similar measures. Even the federal government has acted, introducing prompt payment legislation that applies to federal contracts. Alberta, meanwhile, has lagged behind, leaving contractors and workers vulnerable to unfair practices for far too long. It's a fair question, Mr. Chair, because Albertans expect this government, any government, certainly Alberta's government, to act promptly and to act in their interests. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we have a strong record of advocating for prompt payment. And in fact, in 2016, while in government, the then NDP government introduced prompt payment clauses into government contracts and even set up a 1-800 hotline for subcontractors to report unpaid wages. I'm proud to say that on this side of the House, we campaigned on this issue again in 2019 because we understand that workers deserve to be paid on time, paid decently for their labor. And while I'm glad to see this government finally taking action, the delay has been costly for so many Alberta families and businesses. And I think, moreover, there are questions that remain unanswered. Why do payment timelines differ between tiers? For example, if the Crown has 28 days to pay contractors, why do subcontractors have to wait an additional 7 days for payment, and subcontractors have to wait another 7 days on top of that? In Ontario, contractors and subcontractors operate on much tighter timelines, with payments required within 7 days of receiving funds. And I think these inconsistencies, when compared to other jurisdictions, merit further scrutiny. And I hope the government will clarify its rationale in the other processes of this debate. I want to then now turn our attention to the amendments in the Condominium Property Act. First of all, I do want to commend the government for addressing a long-standing gap in Alberta's housing framework. Condominium living is becoming increasingly popular in our province. It's one of the most affordable kinds of housing that many folks can get into as an owner. And so, as the member for Edmonton Southwest, I can say that there are many, and hundreds, if not thousands, of condos, condo buildings in Edmonton Southwest, lots of young families and lots of young Albertans or Albertans of all ages choosing to buy condominiums. And so this is an issue I've certainly heard firsthand. There have been constituents who have come forward complaining about the often lengthy and very costly process to resolve a dispute with their condominium board as an owner. And so I have to say that this particular legislation and the changes proposed, particularly with the tribunal system that is brought forward, is welcome. But what I would say,
I knew there was going to be a but.
There's always a but. But again, I think the question that bears asking is, why did it take this government 5 years of consultation to finally take action, to finally bring this legislation to fruition? Let me talk about why a tribunal system is so incredibly important. Conflicts between condominium residents, property owners, and boards often have, as many of those in this House who have dealt with similar or been corresponding with similar constituents will know, that it's very difficult and very challenging to resolve. And their residents are often left with no recourse other than costly and time-consuming legal action. And as my colleague has already mentioned, that is an inefficient process, not only for condominium owners as well as board corporations, but also for our court system, because it it unfairly clogs up our legal system that can frankly be left to address other issues. And so the establishment of a tribunal system is a step in the right direction. This quasi-judicial body will provide or has the potential to provide a fair, accessible, and cost-effective mechanisms for resolving disputes ranging from compliance issues to disagreements over fees or common area responsibilities. Other provinces such as Ontario and British Columbia have already implemented similar systems with great success, offering Albertans a model perhaps to consider and to follow. One thing that is unclear in this legislation is whether we are able to avoid some of the challenges that we have seen in British Columbia and Ontario pertaining to delays. Because of the sheer volume of cases in places like British Columbia and Ontario, it can take months or sometimes years to resolve an issue with the condo board. And I think it is incredibly important that as we consider and debate this legislation, that we are able to ensure that those who bring a complaint forward to the tribunal system are able to get it resolved in a timely way. But Mr. Chair, the tribunal system in concept, while as I mentioned, the devil's often in the details and there are issues to be worked out. It is certainly not perfect, but I think the concept of a tribunal system, if implemented correctly, will not only reduce the financial and emotional burden of legal proceedings, but also foster greater accountability amongst condominium boards, property managers, issues perhaps such as noisy neighbors, unauthorized smoking, or other kinds of things that do not require full legal action, but still demand serious attention, may at some point in the future be appropriate matters to bring before the tribunal, certainly recognizing that the tribunal and in its implementation will require a tiered approach, and speaking to stakeholders, including industry professionals in the condominium industry, I understand that they are recommending a slow and steady but progressive approach in developing the tribunal system, which I certainly advocate for as one of their representatives. But the concept of a tribunal system is a sound one and will allow residents to address concerns efficiently and equitably. I'm also pleased to see that this bill includes provisions to protect condominium buyers from unexpected costs related to structural defects in new buildings. We have all heard the famous phrase, leaky condos, and certainly anytime that there is a construction boom in this province or in any jurisdiction in Canada where there is the building of many types of housing in a short period of time, inevitably there will be some challenges. And we have heard, certainly in my experience, constituents have come forward of buying a condominium, and the condominium corporation now realizing that it was built defectively. And other than legal recourse, there is often, which is costly certainly to resolve, but in terms of legislation, it isn't always clear what sorts of protections are afforded to condominium corporations and its owners. And so this is a welcome provision. I believe that technical audits will ensure that developers meet high standards of construction and will safeguard purchasers as well as the corporations from potential and future financial hardship. And this does align Alberta with other provinces that have already implemented similar protections. I do want to take a moment, Mr. Chair, to talk about life leases and some broader housing issues, because again, with this government, I do think that there are often missed opportunities. It's as though this government doesn't fully sort of think through all of their pieces of legislation, and isn't always as thorough as they could be. And so while I support the positive changes introduced in this bill, I also feel like there is a missed opportunity when it comes to life leases. We did see specific life lease legislation earlier in the spring. Unfortunately, as I've spoken at that time, there were missed opportunities there to address some of the challenges for seniors and others who are living in a life lease situation. And so this legislation perhaps could have resolved some of the gaps that the legislation in the spring did not address, and I'm disappointed that the government didn't take an opportunity to perhaps add additional provisions to ensure that life leases can be and the protections can be further augmented. I also want to mention, Mr. Chair, that this bill does little to address Alberta's broader housing crisis. While the tribunal system and the technical audits will certainly be positive, they do not address the skyrocketing costs of housing and rent that are pricing so many Albertans out of their homes, and housing affordability remains one of the most pressing issues in our province. I'm very proud that my colleague, the member from Edmonton Highlands Norwood, had previously introduced a bill to ensure that rents are capped, and again, I think this could have been an opportunity to ensure that there are some protections for renters as well, which we do not see. I think what Albertans are expecting is they're expecting this government to take bold action on housing, to ensure that all of us, every Albertan, has access to safe and affordable housing. So let me just end perhaps with a discussion around the broader context of this bill. It's important, I believe, Mr. Chair, to situate this bill with the broader context of this government's record on workers and housing. While there are good things about this bill, and I'll say first that I intend to support it, and while the prompt payment provisions are a step in the right direction, they do not erase the harm caused by this government's attacks on workers' rights. Over the past several years, we have seen the UCP slash overtime and holiday pay, restrict workers' ability to organize, undermine workplace safety standards, and these actions have made life harder for working families across Alberta. And similarly, while the amendments to the Condominium Property Act address certain challenges, they do not address the root causes of Alberta's housing affordability crisis. Under this government, our province has experienced some of the highest increases in housing and rental costs in the country. It bears repeating that families are struggling to make ends meet, and young Albertans are finding it increasingly difficult to enter the housing market. And so while this bill is helpful in some respects, there are missed opportunities. And there are missed opportunities to address some of the long-standing systemic issues related to housing. And so, Mr. Chair, as we debate this bill, I urge this government to consider additional measures that would support Alberta workers and residents. That includes expanding housing protections. I'd like to see this government develop comprehensive strategies to address to address housing affordability, including increased investment in affordable housing. I know this government, I could go on, Mr. Chair, but I will conclude my remarks for Bill 30. Thank you.
Member for Edmonton Ellerslie.
Very much, Mr. Chair. As you well know, I went on at length on this particular bill during second reading, but I just felt it absolutely necessary to stress just a couple of points regarding Bill 30. And number one, we have to consider the context in which this bill is being presented, because I would like the members on the other side of the House to understand that this particular bill was absolutely necessary, because here in the province of Alberta, for decades, the industry and several industries were relying on the rule of law and contracts in order to make sure that payments were made on time. It was actually stipulated in the contract. So for example, when you have a general contractor working with the subcontractor, it'll actually say in the contract when payment has to be made to the subcontractor. And sometimes this was 60 days, sometimes it was 80 days, sometimes it was 95 days, depending on what both parties would agree to. And you would think that based on the rule of law, that people would just fulfill their contracts. So, Mr. Chair, this is a perfect example of how legislation and regulation are absolutely necessary when the rule of law fails people in this province. And now specifically, we're talking about contractors. And so I would like the members on the other side of the House to realize and actually take it in that, you know, not all legislation and regulation is actually red tape. There are actual pieces of legislation and regulation that are there to make sure that the bad actors comply, not only because they're not complying to the rule of law as it exists up until that moment. And again, Mr. Chair, I just want to stress how that for decades this was going on in the province of Alberta, and that subcontractors specifically requested that this legislation be brought in to the province of Alberta. As what has been stated by my colleagues on this side of the House, other jurisdictions across this great nation brought it in years ago. And Alberta was an outlier and was just depending on rule of law and for people to actually fulfill their contracts. But we see that that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. And so for that reason, legislation had to be made. And so on that note, I would like the minister to take that into consideration, because within this bill, public-private partnerships, this bill does not apply to P3s. And so yet again, we're going to have a situation where there are contractors, subcontractors, depending on the rule of law, and depending that the contract that they signed actually has value, but yet we could be going through similar experiences as we have been going through for the decades before, where subcontractors aren't getting paid on time. So those are the things that I would like the members on the other side of the House to, number one, acknowledge, and that's why this piece of legislation was so important, and that we could use something similar when it comes to P3s moving into the future. And with that, I'll leave my statements at that, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other? The Deputy Government House Leader has risen.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Speaker, it's been a productive debate, and I appreciate contributions from all sides. I move that we adjourn, or pardon me, that we rise and report progress on Bills 24 and 30.
Having heard the motion as proposed by the Honourable Deputy Government House Leader to rise and report progress on Bill 24 and 30, all those in favour, please say aye. Any opposed, please say no. As carried. The committee will now rise and report.
So they may be coming on and reporting about Bill 24 again. Remember, they changed the wording on it. I put that in the notes there that basically says the proposed change wording is to say the rights and freedoms recognized and declared by
Member
the
for
Act
Bonnyville Cold
are
Lake
subject
St. Paul.
only to such reasonable limits
Thank you, Mr.
prescribed by
Speaker.
law as can be
The Committee of the
proportionally.
Whole has under consideration certain bills.
I'll let this finish.
The committee reports
I'm meeting-
progress on the following bills: Bill 24, Bill 30. Mr. Speaker, I wish to table copies of all amendments considered by the Committee of the Whole on this date for the official records of the Assembly.
Does the Assembly concur in the report? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. So ordered.
For second reading, Bill 29, Fairness and Safety in Sport Act, adjourned debate, Honourable Mr. Williams.
The Honourable Minister of Mental Health and Addiction has 14 minutes left if he wishes to use it. Any others wishing to speak to Bill 29? Member for Edmonton Whitemud has risen.
Thank you. It's kind. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise and speak in this House, as is my privilege to do so. It is not, however, a pleasure to speak to Bill 29, the Fairness and Safety in Sports Act. Let's begin by saying, Mr. Speaker, this is my first opportunity to speak to this bill, and let me just begin by saying it is very clear that this government continues to govern by conspiracy theory and not by facts, evidence, or the issues that Albertans truly care about. This is a bill that is purporting to develop or enforce fairness and safety in sports. However, it does precisely the opposite. I want to be clear that the members across the way, the government members, the ministers, the premier, I assume all of them hear from Albertans the same way that all of us do. And when Albertans talk about what their priorities are, healthcare and affordability are the two largest issues, along with, of course, having a sustainable economy with good paying jobs, and they care about education. But this is not a priority for Albertans. It was a priority for the Premier to achieve the results she was seeking in her leadership review, and she achieved that by getting the support of 4,200 members of her party. However, there are almost 5 million people who live in this province, and this is not their priority. Their priorities are clearly not reflected in the agenda of this government. We have seen over and over again by the bills that have been introduced by this government, and particularly the fact that a quarter of their legislative agenda this fall are focused on issues that either are not dominant for most Albertans, but is also based on conspiracy theory that is meant to divide people, and most frighteningly are actually designed to harm a very vulnerable population. And I want to take this moment, as I did when I spoke to Bills 26 and 27, to acknowledge that there are trans Albertans and their family members and their loved ones and their friends and their colleagues who are watching right now and who feel vulnerable and who feel attacked by a government who is focused on making life more difficult for them and placing them in more vulnerable situations. And I want them to know that once again, the official opposition and all of the MLAs on this side will continue to advocate for their safety and their inclusion and for all their opportunities for success, Mr. Speaker. That is what we are focused on. So, as I mentioned, this is not a real issue. We know that because the Minister of Sports and Tourism introduced this bill, even said so. He could not produce any data to explain why this bill is being brought forward. He couldn't outline any number of apparently transgender athletes that are in women's sports. There was no researched need or evidence need that brought this forward, but this is based on satisfying conspiracy theorists within the governing party's base, and then they've done that, Mr. Speaker. So let's go over what this bill does. Ironically, although the minister and the government and the premier will talk about what this bill does, very little of it is actually contained in this bill itself. The bill primarily requires school boards, universities and post-secondary institutions, and provincial sports organizations to maintain policies around fairness and safety, but really specifically, they're focused on eligibility. Now, surprisingly, although we know that the minister has talked about this bill being about establishing, quote, biological female-only divisions, and that sex registration at birth would determine competitive eligibility. None of these terms are actually used within the bill. Where it's really going to happen, Mr. Speaker, which we know it's going to happen, it's going to happen in the regulations. And that's very clear. And let's also be clear that the reason why it's happening in the regulations and not here in the Legislative Assembly is because they want to do this in the cover of darkness. Because regulations don't come before this House. They don't get the transparency of all the readings and the potential amendments and the debate and the questions that happen in this space. Those are going to be hidden in regulations that can be signed off by an order in council. So in those, but we know because the minister has said what's going to be in there, it is to establish biological female-only divisions. Now, I would think if we're going to talk about fairness and safety in sport, there's so many other things that we can talk about that will actually have an impact on making sure there is fairness and safety in sport. One of those might be actually making sure that we're doing all we can to encourage more people to participate in sports, more young people in particular. We all recognize the value of sports and recreation for mental health, physical health. We know what it builds in terms of skills and opportunities. We know young people, if they excel in certain sports, get the opportunity to go to post-secondary. They may go on to compete. And of course, Mr. Speaker, just today we were very honored and privileged to have in this assembly members of Team Canada who represented our country in the Paris Olympics. Extraordinary Canadians, extraordinary Albertans who we're also deeply proud of. Well, they got there because they were able to participate in sports. And let's be clear, like, hey, I've got 2 kids who love to play sports. I'm not sure that either of my kids are ever going to become professional or competitive sports players, but they sure do love it. They get to spend time with their friends and their peers, and they're learning skills, not just about physical skills, but actually how to work as a team. They're learning leadership skills, all the things that we want kids to do. So what if we're really truly talking about fairness and safety in sport, we should be talking about how do we encourage more young people to do that. By the way, that also comes with the support for all the infrastructure that's required around sports. If we want more kids to participate in sports, we need to make sure that parents are able to afford those sports, that they're able to have the time to do that. And in a time when we're actually in an affordability crisis in this province, fewer and fewer parents are able to do that. And I'll be honest, even in my family, we had to make some difficult decisions about how many activities my kids could participate in because it is getting very expensive. And I know that I live in relative privilege. So certainly, access to sports is really important. Making sure that we have infrastructure for sports is equally important too. But by the way, this is a government that has for 5 years been dramatically underfunding infrastructure, particularly at the municipal level, which goes to things like recreation centers, which goes to things like encouraging spaces for families and kids to participate in sports. So those are the things that should be happening. It's not what's happening here. This bill is really going to allow the minister to now suddenly get reporting on and require these organizations and school boards and universities to have policies around eligibility. Now, as I said, Mr. Speaker, you're not going to see a lot of this stuff in the actual bill. It's all going to come out in the regulations. But as the minister has said, this is about establishing biological female-only divisions. Now, what's interesting about this bill, there's so many levels to it that are quite offensive, but one of the levels that is offensive is that obviously this is only designed to focus on trans girls and trans women. That's what the focus is. They don't seem to have a problem, of course, with trans men participating in sports because there's a sexist misperception there, of course, that they're not going to be challenging or be that competitive. It's only targeting trans women. So basically, this is only addressing female-oriented sports. Now, I had an interesting situation, Mr. Speaker, where I was looking through this bill and thinking about the regulations and knowing what the minister has said is coming, that it's going to be requiring, basically, whether it's school board level, post-secondary, or these provincial sports organizations, that there could be situations where girls or women who are participating in sport will be asked to prove their gender. Their sex registration at birth is the words that the minister used. So I had an interesting thought about what does that exactly mean? Because I have a 9-year-old daughter. She's just played in a co-ed handball team, and I realize I don't know yet. It's not in the act, but I understand this probably won't apply to her level of sport. At grade 3, grade 4 level of handball. But I do hope that one day she's a pretty athletic kid. Maybe in 5 years or so, when she's 14, she might want to play on her junior high, or maybe going into high school, play on her high school basketball, or she likes basketball, or potentially volleyball team. I have a feeling she'd be pretty good at volleyball. So maybe she's going to want to do that. Well, the way this is set up is that if a complaint is made, it would be, and by the way, it's complaint driven. Somebody could complain that my daughter either is playing too well, so they're questioning whether or not she is a girl, or perhaps she doesn't look girlish enough. And so somebody can make a challenge about my 14-year-old daughter and say, prove she's a girl. Now, what's also interesting, Mr. Speaker, is that the language the minister has used is sex registration at birth. Now, that is a different thing, Mr. Speaker, than a birth certificate, right? Because most parents have a birth certificate, not all, because actually you do actually have to pay and fill out the forms and get that, but let's say you have a birth certificate. Now, birth certificates, it's true, by law can be changed, right? So, you can make some changes based on, name changes. And yes, if there has been a sex reassignment, there could be, or gender change on a birth certificate. So I think it's very specific that the minister has used the language of sex registration at birth. Because what that means is they're not actually saying that if a complaint is made about my daughter playing too well or looking not girlish enough, that it won't be sufficient for me to just provide a birth certificate. I actually have to provide sex registration at birth. And what is that, Mr. Speaker? So I did a little digging. And that's actually something that's held by Vital Statistics, Alberta, right? It's actually documentation that they keep when a baby is born, that they register that sex of that child at birth. And that is different than a birth certificate. I don't get that as a parent. That's kept by Vital Statistics. So here's the scenario. Just work with me here through this, Mr. Speaker. So let's talk about the offensiveness, first of all, of somebody making a complaint that my daughter may not look girlish enough or plays too competitively, and they suspect maybe she might be a biological boy. I am now, the school board, at my school board level, is required to ask me as a parent for sex registration at birth. I don't have that. I have a birth certificate. And by the way, according to this process, they won't trust me as a parent to provide a birth certificate because I could have changed that birth certificate. So I'm not even trusted as a parent to provide proof of the gender of my daughter. They're going to go to Vital Statistics. Now, I don't know if the school board's going to go to it or they're going to make me go get it. They're going to make me pay for it. But just think for a moment about that process of a school board having to tell a parent, not only has somebody complained about your child not looking like the right gender, maybe playing too competitively, but we don't even trust you, parent, to provide proof of what her gender is. So they don't trust me as a parent. And then more importantly, Mr. Speaker, what message does that send to my daughter about sport? What message does that send to the school board and the teachers who have to go, I'm so sorry, you're going to have to prove your gender? That is so fundamentally humiliating, and it is so disrespectful and so undermines the dignity of both that child as well as myself as a parent. But that's what this government is setting up to do. They're setting up a system where we're going to be suspicious of children and we're going to discourage them from participating in sport. That, I cannot imagine how any of that is the priority of any government, let alone a government who's governing during a time when the healthcare system is in crisis, when schools are jam-packed to the brim, and kids have more complex needs than ever before, and they do not have the support they need, and where the cost of living continues to go up in a disproportionate fashion in Alberta than it is in any other part of the country. This is what this government is setting up to do, and frankly, it is despicable, and it is disgusting, and it is also sending a terrible message not only to young people and to trans people, by the way, to be that they should be suspicious, that they should be treated with suspicion, but it's also not fundamentally based in any data whatsoever. There is zero data to support that transgender athletes are disproportionately taking advantage of, or overly competitive, that are somehow, it's unfair for their participation in sports. It's such a small number of people, but it's also, there's no data to support this. But then apart from that, we also have all the organizations in this country who are in our province that do professional sports, who are not consulted, who said, quote, this is from the Alberta Colleges Athletic Conference. This is not something that anyone identified as an urgent matter that required immediate attention or any attention at all, to be frank. We know that there's a problem of other athletes from other jurisdictions now being able to come and compete here in Alberta. It affects our ability to host tournaments, to be competitive at the post-secondary level. If we create co-ed divisions, or we create biological female-only divisions, our athletes will not be able to compete in the same way with associations and athletes from other parts of the country. And it's going to create, it's going to undermine our very competitive sports system here. And we should be proud of our sports system here. And by the way, these are concerns that have been raised by a number of athletic organizations who said we don't need this. And by the way, hats off to many of the, like I know Mount Royal's athletic program, and others have said, we actually pride ourselves on having an inclusive athletics program. And thank you for them to stand up for their athletes and to make sport an inclusive place, because that's how we attract the best. And that's how we actually develop the best athletes, is by being inclusive and by encouraging safety and fairness in sport, which is not at all what this bill does. So, Mr. Speaker, once again, in this space, we're wasting time on this government's conspiracy theories when we should be spending time on the issues that make a difference to Albertans. And once again, the government has introduced a bill that does nothing like that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Members, I encourage you, if you are wanting to speak to one another in the chamber, please keep it down to a minimum. And if you need to go into more discussion, there are lounges available for you to go to. So I will recognize the member from Lacombe-Panoka next, to be followed by Edmonton Gold Bar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Irene Parlby, one of my favorites and one of the famous five, was an extraordinary woman. She was the first Alberta woman to be appointed a cabinet minister and only the second in Canada. What has made her extraordinary is her insight and her courage. You see, Mr. Speaker, the Supreme Court of Canada, in their interpretation of the British North America Act, ruled in 1928 that when Mrs. Parlby was 60 years old, women were not persons. It wasn't until 1927 that the majority of Canadian women could actually vote in federal elections. This was a victory and meant women could also run for office, and this was first realized in 1921 when Agnes MacPhail became the first Canadian woman elected to the House of Commons. Hear, hear. As much as this was a win, women were still excluded from the Senate as they were deemed non-persons. It didn't take long for Emily Murphy, Canada's first female judge, to take action. She invited 4 other women to her home right here in Edmonton, and together they sent a letter petition to the Governor General of Canada to challenge the interpretation of the word persons in the BNA Act. The issue was directed to the Supreme Court of Canada to consider this question. Does the word person in Section 24 of the British North American Act 1867 include female persons? Unfortunately, all 5 justices ruled unanimously on April 24th, 1928, that women were not persons under Section 24 of the BNA Act. This was obviously very disappointing, but not the end of this story. The famous 5 knew they could appeal to the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council in London, England, and they did just that. The Privy Council, after much deliberation, reversed the ruling of the Supreme Court, and on October 18th, 1929, women were deemed to be persons and eligible to become members of the Senate of Canada. Lord Sankey himself delivered the decision to the Privy Council and remarked, "The exclusion of women from all public offices is a relic of days more barbarous than ours. And to those who ask why the word persons should include females, the obvious answer is, why should it not? That was almost 100 years ago that these brave and tireless women persevered simply to be acknowledged as a person. Today, there's a different battle for women's rights, and it's the right to be protected in sport. Women have historically been active in their own category, and there is evidence of women being involved in sporting activities throughout all of history. Even in the modern Olympics, women have been involved since 1900. In recent years, the right for women to be protected in a women's only category has been threatened and even taken away. Almost daily, there are new reports of women being forced to compete against men with multiple negative consequences. In 2023, Peyton McNabb, a high school volleyball player from North Carolina, was hit with a spiked ball from a transgender woman and sustained significant injuries that still plague her today. She is now speaking out. You see, Mr. Speaker, the male punch is over 160% stronger than the female punch. This is relevant not just for boxing, but also related activities like volleyball. Riley Gaines is another of the most high-profile female athletes we know whose right to fair competition was taken away. A 12-time All-American swimmer, Riley was at the top of her game and ranked second in the country when she came up against a transgender swimmer at the NCAA Division I Women's Swimming Championships. This individual, Leah Thomas, had competed in the men's division through post-secondary years, and partway through these years, transitioned and began to compete against women. Oddly, at that championship race, Riley and Leah tied. This is an extremely rare anomaly in a sport that is timed to the 100th of a second. Sadly, that trophy was given to Leah with no reasonable explanation. Today, Riley is also campaigning full-time for women's rights to fair sport and for biological women to compete exclusively with biological women. Finally, my friend, April Hutchinson, also has a story to tell. April is a record-holding powerlifter, Canadian women's champion, and a 3-time member of our Team Canada. When a transgender woman entered her sport, April was banned for 2 years for speaking out in an attempt to protect women and fairness in her sport, a sport that saved her life. You see, Mr. Speaker, April has experienced significant trauma in her life, and that trauma led her to doubt her identity, to question her femininity, and eventually enter into very self-destructive behaviors that threatened her very life. Turning to alcohol, April found she felt better temporarily, and so she drank more until many years later she discovered she had to have alcohol just to function. Thankfully, April went into rehab. She stopped drinking and began powerlifting and found a new purpose in life. When she was suspended from her sport, a sport that saved her life, April was shocked. It was inconceivable to her that she should be forced to compete against an individual who had a natural and biological advantage over her that she nor any woman could ever compete with. This is significant. For April, it means she has been invalidated and robbed, and those are her words. These are just 3 stories of life-changing events in 3 women's lives, but it's just so much bigger than just these 3 stories. I personally have a friend, Peyton, who joined us here today in the gallery. She's a very talented basketball player on scholarship at one of our post-secondary schools here in Alberta, who walked away from her scholarship and program after receiving a serious concussion from a transgender individual on the basketball court. This is why individuals like Peyton and others are supporting this legislation. A report compiled by Reem Al-Salam, a UN Special Rapporteur on violence against women and girls, was brought before the UN General Assembly this very fall. The report exposed how nearly 900 medals have been lost by more than 600 female athletes in 29 different sports. Critics could respond to this as just merely anecdotal, so let's go a little deeper. Hilton and Lundberg, in their paper entitled Transgender Women in the Female Category of Sport, begin by stating the obvious that males do have a distinct advantage over females in competitive sport. Males typically have a 10 to 50% advantage in performance gap over females, depending on the sport. In activities related to muscle mass and explosive strength, like powerlifting, that performance gap is even more pronounced. In regards to transgender women, the criteria established by the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, in relation to testosterone suppression was examined. Studies showed that even when testosterone is suppressed, the performance gap or muscular advantage enjoyed by transgender women is only minimally reduced. Additionally, Karolinska Institute published the results of researcher Tommy Lundberg examining changes in muscle mass and strength in transgender individuals. The study goes back 5 years to 2019. What Lundberg discovered was that the transgender women did not lose strength at all, despite inhibited testosterone production. In addition, the effect on muscle mass of the transgender women were less pronounced than many people previously thought, losing only 5% of their muscle volume over the thigh muscles. The studies coming out now, and there are many, are showing that in sport, biological men, even if they have transitioned and are suppressing testosterone, still have a significant and measurable advantage over biological women. Mr. Speaker, individuals like Irene Parlby, one of the famous 5 whose picture we see in this very building, are still talked about today, held in high esteem because they were courageous. They knew the truth about women's rights and they acted on it. It is a tremendous and humble privilege to stand on the shoulders of those like Irene Parlby, a former MLA in the area where I now get to serve. Times may change, society may change, but women's rights do not change.
Hear, hear.
Today, we debate this bill, and today, my beautiful and courageous friend Peyton, who sat in this gallery, supports this bill. And my friend April, a woman who was saved by her sport and is now watching online as we speak, supports this bill. Today, as I stand on the shoulders of women's rights activist Irene Parlby, I support this bill, and I encourage all my colleagues to do likewise for Peyton, for April, for our sisters and our daughters, and all future generations of women. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Edmonton Gold Bar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure for me to rise and speak to Bill 29 and make three points. One is touching on this issue of science that the member from Lacombe-Pinoka has discussed a little bit. I'd like to rebut some of her arguments. If I get to it, I would also like to highlight some unintended consequences from the government snitch line that the minister is setting up with this bill. And then I hope to end with some helpful suggestions for actually raising the profile of women's sports and doing more to actually create fairness in sport here in the province of Alberta. So with respect to science, we heard the member from Lacombe-Pinoka as well as the Minister for Sport refer to this report by the Special Rapporteur to the United Nations on women and gender-based violence. And there is a quote in there that the member from Lacombe-Pinoka said about the hundreds of medals that have been stripped from women competing in dozens of sports. And so if you look at the footnote for that in the report, that claim is made by an organization called the Women's Liberation Front, which, according to their website, also unapologetically supports abortion on demand. So I look forward to the members opposite also endorsing the other work that the Women's Liberation Front is proposing. But regardless, Mr. Speaker, I hear the Minister of Sport is obviously rushing off to draft the legislation that will guarantee abortion on demand for women in Alberta. I can tell you that many women will be excited to see that.
Point of order has been called. Government House Leader.
I appreciate the wit of the member from Edmonton Gold Bar. It's often welcome in this chamber and often not welcome in this chamber, but I am not rushing anywhere, Mr. Speaker, to draft legislation for on-demand abortion. That would certainly be imputing false motives against me, a member of this chamber. I would ask that member apologize and withdraw. That's a ridiculous comment that he just said.
I'll recognize the Deputy Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I would note that at the moment that this occurred, there was a considerable amount of heckling coming from the government side. And certainly there are better ways for government members to express their concerns if they have them. And certainly better than, I'd say, raising what is not a point of order. So what I would say, Mr. Chair, or Mr. Speaker, is the member did not To what I heard, and again, I do not have the I do not have the benefit of the blues. I heard the member making a joke. I think quite clearly it was humor, despite the fact that the government House Leader, the minister, may not have appreciated that humor. He was not stating unequivocally that this was something that was occurring. Now, again, the members are heckling. While I think most members have remained relatively respectful during this debate. So again, Mr. Chair, from what I heard, and again, I do not have the benefit of the blues, I would not consider this a point of order. Thank you.
Any others wishing to speak to the point of order? We were doing so well. But I will rule that this is not a point of order, but it was skating awfully close to the line. And I recognize the concern that the government House Leader has brought forward, and we have to be very careful. We're not imputing false motives on to one another. And so I would caution the members, all members, to use their discretion and try and ensure that they're not causing problems with regards to orderly conduct within this chamber. Member for Edmonton Gold Park.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm always happy to skate close to the line and prove my gender if anybody across the way is concerned about me skating in a league that I don't belong in. But I wanted to get back to this idea, this claim that has been made in this special rapporteur's report about the hundreds of medals that have been lost by women athletes. That comes from an organization called the Women's Liberation Front, allegedly. There's no reference in the report to the actual document that was used to support that claim, nor can you find any such document if you go to the Women's Liberation Front's website. So we can only assume that this number is completely made up because nobody presents any evidence that it actually is supported by any data.
You're here.
Don't hesitate to interrupt, but the pursuant to Standing Order 4.2, the Assembly stands adjourned until Monday afternoon at 1:30 p.m.
Order.
Well, there you go. I think we're done there. Thanks for sticking around for the last 3 hours. Oh, it's only been 3 hours. Feels like a lot longer. And I haven't even eaten my entire bowl of popcorn. So again, just to kind of paraphrase for those people that maybe have not joined us right at 1:30, we were basically waiting for them to come on and talk about the Bill of Rights, and they did. And I'm going to go back and show the screen here again that shows, if I can do that here, there we go, that technology. So in the, can I do this here? Oh man, I've got way too many things open. My apologies. You know what, I don't even need to scroll this. Basically, all I wanted to do is just show you that this is the legislature dashboard. On the dashboard, it shows the dates in which they were actually in the chamber and what they discussed. There's transcripts, etc. And the one that we're looking for is Bill 24. If I can find the window to show, I will definitely scroll around and you can see what I'm looking at here. Well, this might be it there. So again, this one shows November 24th, and yesterday was, November 20th. And so this is today. This is the order paper. That was the agenda. And as we go down through here, we can see what bills they were presenting. And this is the actual document for Bill 24 as presented on October 28th. And first reading was passed. That's the transcript that says what it is. Second reading, again, passed and what the transcript is. Committee of the whole and the transcript. And what we're waiting for really is this last part here. The committee of the whole has been adjourned. We're waiting for the transcript to come on. But I did write down in the comments, if you're coming in late, then you probably won't see it. But essentially, they've proposed the word, changing the word. This is from from Scott Sear, who is the MLA for Bonnyville, St. Paul. I know there's 3 of them in there, but Bonnyville, St. Paul. Excuse me if somebody's there and I don't know the actual name of the constituency, but that's who it was. They presented the word changing, and the word changes, instead of just being demonstrably justified, they've added in proportionally and based on evidence, which basically makes things a little bit better, because stealing the words right from the charter saying demonstrably justified, that basically means that, as we've seen, well, I mean, the government says that this is an issue, or the WHO says it's an issue, so that's demonstrably justified. But by putting in based on evidence, then maybe it actually has to go through some sort of legal process to say, yes, in the case of a pandemic, plexiglass was useful, or face masks were useful, or standing 6 feet away were 26% less deaths. They'll come up with some names or whatever stats. But essentially now it just says the proposed wording is: the rights and freedoms recognized and declared by this act are subject only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be proportionally demonstrably justified based on evidence in a free and democratic Alberta. Now, again, that is what my notes were. That's what I received a text on. But until I actually see the transcript, I'm not going to quote those. And that's why that's all I'm doing, is just saying that that's what we see. What does that mean for us and the Bill of Rights? I don't know. We'll have to get some big heads on here to talk a little bit more about that. We'll reach out to some lawyers and see if they're able to come on and talk a little bit more about this. And again, what's going past this is, if we go through the committee of the whole, they accept these changes, and then it goes into third reading. And then from the third reading, does it actually become law? Does it basically go to royal assent? That I don't know. Haven't got a clue. I'm not a lawyer. And so we'll end up having to figure this out. So again, that's where I'm going to leave this. Thanks for joining us for such a long afternoon. I'm going to go finish the rest of my popcorn, which maybe you guys have already made too. I was hoping to actually eat this entire bowl, but it was really quick. If I'm going to stop this and you can go back and scroll through. The point of Bill 24, when they actually brought it up, was like less than 5 minutes. Scott Sear did his thing. Mickey Amory came on and said a couple of things, and then that was it. And again, I can't even go back and look at that because they're still changing, or it was a live viewing, much like when you're doing it here. You can't just stop and go back. Although if you're on Rumble or something, you probably could. But if you're on Facebook or viewing it live, you can't. So why don't I get the hell out of here? So this will be compressed, and then you can scroll back through and find out exactly what was said. I'm going to probably do the same thing. And maybe I'll talk to Chris a little bit later. Maybe we'll come on tonight or sometime this weekend, and definitely talk a little bit more about the bills. If you haven't watched last night's APP webinar that I did with Sharon Polsky, I think that's a well watchable video as well. It's about an hour and 15 minutes long. And we actually talk about the number of bills in Parliament and in the Senate, and the number of bills that are actually happening in the Legislature. And it's no wonder when you ask an MLA or an MP, well, what's the status on 293 or 62 or whatever? They don't know what it is, because the numbers actually are so, they're just an irrelevant number to them. I still think that they should actually be called instead of 293, it's the Pandemic Awareness bill or whatever you want to call it, because rather than just a number, because I think that would actually make people a little bit more aware of what things are coming down the pipe. The same thing as Bill 24. I talked to a girl today that had no idea what Bill 24, none of the bill numbers are, and she didn't even know what the Bill of Rights was all about. And yet she follows us. So that was an interesting conversation. So again, if you like what we're doing and able to do this, if you can support us somehow, then please do. You can always go to TheChris&KerryShow.com. There's a couple links in there as well. And share if you can possibly do that too. I'm going to be quiet now and go back and finish my popcorn. You guys have a great evening. It's 4:38 here in Calgary. And I've got nothing else to say. So that's all I'm going to say. You guys have a great night. We'll talk to you later.